Will of Iron 1. Black Nail and the others stayed in Hurst Crest for 2 days. They needed time to rest and recuperate after their journey through the uncharted green, and no one was in a huge rush to get back to shelter anyway. Hurst Crest wasn't a great place to visit. The walled town streets were still creepy and depressing, but it was a novel place to explore, and roaming the streets was safer than walking through the green, probably. The people from shelter were particularly curious, since some of them had never visited another town or city before. Ha, what a bunch of rubes. Black Nail himself had visited 5 cities and towns. That was a lot, probably. Before departing Hurst Crest, Black Nail's party got a few things done. The hobgoblins got the feast they'd been promised, although since there was a local shortage, the fare wasn't all that great and had mostly come from the supplies they'd brought. Black Nail was able to eat his fill, though. The hobgoblins also managed to find themselves a fair pile of loot, even if it was mostly junk no one else wanted. Farrer also used this time to meet up with some human craftsmen and pick out one to travel back with them. The fire-obsessed hobgoblin really wanted someone to learn smelting from. Thankfully, Illisti was quite generous about rewarding the hobgoblins for their help, and he gave them everything they asked for. He did have one request, though. Since he was facing a food shortage, the VYMPR wanted some hobgoblin hunters to bring in game for him, and he was willing to pay them for it. Once the food from the wagon ran out, Hurst Crest would start starving again. Black Nail readily agreed. It cost him nothing, and he was always looking to put some of his lazy minions to work. He had too many of them, and he didn't like it when they hung around his base and ate up his food. On the day of departure, Black Nail led his minions and allies through the gates of Hurst Crest and out into the fields around the town. It was early in the morning and the wagon creaked as it rolled over the packed dirt path. The travelers had unloaded almost all the food that they'd brought, but they'd refilled the wagon with loot and equipment. Black Nail and Farrer had scooped up all the axes and metal tools they could find, which was a lot. Hurst Crest had plenty of steel shovels and similar things laying around inside its many abandoned warehouses. Behind Black Nail, walked the hobgoblins that weren't out scouting ahead of the main party. Geralt and most of the humans from shelter were walking around the wagon while Kida and her followers took up the rear. Since the Vampirs and their troops had remained behind, the party was much smaller now. The only new additions were the craftsman Farrer had chosen and the small female he'd brought with him. Briefly, Black Nail wondered why Farrer had chosen this particular human. His bland looks didn't make him stand out from everyone else in Hurst Crest, but then again Farrer was weird. He'd probably picked the man based on whispers from the fire or something. Soon after they'd entered the forest, they approached the dark woods that the spiders had taken over, and they had to leave the old overgrown road and head off into the forest. Luckily, they could just follow the path they had made to get to Hurst Crest in the first place. Moving through the green was slow, especially for the wagon, but they knew which way they had to go and what lay before them. Soon, they passed close to the location of the goblin camp that Black Nail had conquered and occupied. Since Scamp and a few other minions were still there, Black Nail took some hobgoblins along and went to check on him. It was only a short walk through the forest, so they left the others with the wagon. When Black Nail got there, he immediately noticed that the camp had undergone some changes. A swathe of small trees and bushes had been cleared around the edge of the camp, and a short stretch of wall had already been built on one side. The patches of herbs appeared unchanged, though. That was good. Black Nail had been a little worried about Scamp accidentally killing them all somehow. Knowing Scamp, it wasn't impossible that his mere presence might have caused all the plants to wither down to nothing. The nearby goblins scattered as Black Nail and his minions walked into the clearing. One of the hobgoblins left behind was on the far edge of the camp, and he began walking over to greet Black Nail. Meanwhile, several of the feral goblins yelped loudly in excitement, which caused a sleepy-looking Scamp to crawl out of one of the huts. He yawned as he got up and tried to figure out what was going on. Black Nail walked right over to Scamp, stopped in front of him, and then slugged the surprised hobgoblin right in the face. Scamp yelped in pain and fell over onto his ass. This both amused and satisfied Black Nail, who grinned down at his minion. Good job. Keep up the good work, Black Nail told Scamp. It was important to make sure everyone remembered who the real boss was, but also to give them positive reinforcement. Thanks. Scamp replied as he rubbed his sore nose and climbed back to his feet. He didn't sound too grateful for the praise. I'm just stopping by to see how you are doing. Where is the female hobgoblin? Black Nail asked. Scamp pointed back toward the hut that he'd just emerged from. She's still in there. Try to get at least some work done, Black Nail replied with a frown. Scamp smiled proudly. Of course, I'm working super hard, boss. Soon, I'll have the wall done, just like you asked. Black Nail rolled his eyes in disbelief. He doubted the wall would be complete anytime soon. It was a big project, and he knew Scamp too well to believe that he'd personally gotten his hands dirty working on it. Scamp was a lazy idiot, which was what made him a great sub-leader. He wasn't a threat. After a brief conversation to get the other hobgoblin caught up, Black Nail had his minions drop off a bunch of the tools they'd been carrying. He'd brought some axes and shovels to help the hobgoblins here build the wall. Steel axes made chopping down trees and cutting stakes much easier. Stone tools broke very easily, so they had to be constantly repaired, which took time. Scamp seemed fine with staying here now, but some of the other hobgoblins wanted to leave, so Black Nail switched a few of them around with the hobgoblins he'd brought. Illisti had told him that moving his minions around a lot was an important part of keeping them loyal, and Black Nail could see why. It prevented them from getting too comfortable and forming cliques. Plans for keeping his hobgoblins loyal had been on Black Nail's mind a lot lately. I'll send some more workers from the main camp soon. Just keep building the wall and taking care of the herbs, Black Nail told Scamp before heading back into the forest. He didn't want to leave the humans waiting too long, lest they get into trouble. Fortunately, when the hobgoblins got back to the wagon, everyone was still in one piece and nothing important had happened. Black Nail took a moment to speak to Geralt and reassure him, and then they resumed their journey. However, when they got to the other side of the dark woods and reached the overgrown road again, Black Nail called for a stop and started rummaging through the wagon for some specific items he'd packed. What are you doing? There is nothing here but empty forest and the same endless greenery, Geralt had asked as he walked over to Black Nail's side. There was a confused frown on his face. Black Nail pulled out a torch and a large flask of oil. Just stay here. I need to go into the dark woods for a while, but be prepared to move quickly when I get back. How long are you going to be? Geralt asked with obvious concern. Not long. I will be running back, Black Nail replied as he looked over his minions. Geralt tried to ask him a few more questions, but Black Nail didn't answer. Instead, he selected 2 minions to come help him. You will probably want to see this up close, Black Nail told Farrer. The other hobgoblin he selected was Hera. She followed him around everywhere anyway, and probably would attempt to sneak after him even if he tried to leave her behind. He'd caught her stalking him a few times. She clearly had way too much free time. With those 2 minions in tow, Black Nail started walking back down the overgrown road and toward shadowy trees that hung over it. I don't like this place. It makes the back of my neck tingle, Hera remarked as she looked up into the dark treetops. Any number of dangerous things could have been hiding up above them in the branches. Yay, it's a bad place to visit, Black Nail replied as he held his torch up and strode forward. The flickering flames pushed back the darkness but didn't dispel it. In gloomy silence, the dark haze hovered around them. Shadows shifted and danced as the light of the torch hit the twisted trees. Then why are we here? Hera asked. It was Farrer that answered her. That's obvious. We're going to burn it all down. What? Hera exclaimed as she turned to look at him. Farrer shrugged and grinned excitedly. That's why he brought me, to burn things. This place is bad, but fire will fix that. Also, look at all this dry wood. Anyone who saw it would want to burn it all down. Hera gave Farrer a doubtful look. She seemed concerned, and she turned to look at Black Nail. He just nodded in agreement though, which didn't reassure her at all. The forest around them had grown even darker. The trees stretched up high into the sky, creating a stifling sea of foliage above their heads that blocked out all the light of the sun. Closer to the ground, twisted white branches jutted out from the sides of pale trees. Some of trees were dead and dried out, like Farrer had pointed out, but many others still had healthy canopies up above. As he walked and held his torch high, Black Nail carefully studied the twisting branches that hung low to the ground. Was that glint of light as something reflected the illumination from the torch? Yes, it was. Black Nail instantly stopped walking. As Hera and Farrer stumbled to a stop behind him, he turned to look at the female hobgoblin. Walk over to that tree. Why? Hera asked skeptically. The dark woods clearly made her nervous. Black Nail gave her his best reassuring smile. That's an order, but don't worry. I'll protect you if anything happens. Hera hesitated but did as she was told. She began to carefully walk toward the tree as she scanned the surroundings for any sign of danger. She didn't see any, but as she neared the pale trunk of the tree, something moved up above in the shadows. Then, there was the crack of a branch as a large blurry shape hurtled down at her from one of the branches overhead. It zoomed toward her exposed back with hungry purpose. Reacting too slowly, Hera tried to spin around to face the threat. The shape was less than a foot from her head when Black Nail swatted it aside with a two-handed swing of his sword. There was a loud crack as the flat of his blade smashed the leaping spider and knocked it away from Hera. Instead, it hit the ground and bounced. Hera squeaked in fear and jumped back. The huge grey spider hissed angrily as it jumped back onto its feet. It immediately tried to scuttle away, but while it was still stunned, Black Nail stepped forward and used the tip of his blade to impale its abdomen. The hairy grey spider hissed and squirmed, but it was stuck now. Dark fluid seeped out of the wound around the blade for a few seconds, and then it went still. What is that? Hera shrieked fearfully. It's a spider, Black Nail replied as he removed his blade and bent down to examine his catch. The arachnid was easily 2 feet across. Is that why you wanted me to go to the tree? Black Nail hesitated. It was probably a good idea to not upset Hera any further. Yes. Good job. You really helped me catch it. Hera wasn't mollified. She looked outraged. It could have killed me. No, I was protecting you, and their bite isn't deadly. They just paralyze you and wrap you up for later. You were safe with me here, Black Nail told her as he picked the dead spider up. He wanted to show it to everyone. The stupid humans hadn't believed him when he'd described them. Can we burn things now? Farrer interjected impatiently. Sure, Black Nail replied. Hera didn't look mad anymore. If anything, she looked smug. Black Nail's words had apparently calmed her down. She seemed to like the idea that he'd protected her, so he handed her the dead spider. Startled, she took it and then stared at it as if unsure of what had just happened. Meanwhile, Black Nail took out his flask of oil and dumped its contents on the base of a dead tree. He'd asked Illisti what the best way to burn out the spiders was, and the Vimper had suggested this route. When the flask was empty, Black Nail lit it using his torch. The slick oil immediately burst into flames, and the fire quickly began to spread past the oil and onto the dry wood. We should run now, Black Nail said as he stepped back away from the flames and smoke. Fire grinned joyfully and his eyes reflected the red light of the burning tree. He nodded absently at Black Nail's words, but he made no move to leave, so Black Nail grabbed his shoulder and pulled him away. Hera followed them with the spider still in hand. She still seemed to have no idea what was going on. As they retreated back the way they'd come, there was a loud crack and shower of sparks sprayed in their direction, causing everyone to pick up speed. It didn't take them long to reach the edge of the dark woods, but before leaving the shadows, Black Nail glanced back. Behind him, he saw the previously gloomy forest glowing with a sinister orange light. The fire was spreading quickly. The hobgoblin's hurried run drew a lot of attention when they reached the wagon. Everyone looked in their direction, and most the people looked wary. Holy gods! That's an incredibly large spider, Geralt remarked in surprise as he saw what Hera was carrying. There were mutters of agreement from most the other humans. Yep, I caught it myself, but we should get moving. Right now, Black Nail told him. Geralt looked concerned. Why? You're not being chased by a swarm of giant arachnid, are you? Don't be silly. I set the forest on fire, Black Nail explained. What? Why would you do that? Geralt asked in shock. Illisti told me to, and he also said the flames shouldn't spread out of the dark woods, but we should probably keep moving just to be safe. Hera dumped the dead spider on the wagon, as the party began moving again. Black Nail was pretty sure he could smell smoke on the wind now. I still don't understand why you wanted to burn down the forest, Geralt had told Black Nail as they jogged side by side. The creaking of the wagon's wheels was loud behind them. Black Nail frowned at the man's cluelessness. Because giant spiders live there, obviously. I wanted to clear the road so that we get to Hurst Crest faster. Geralt huffed. Well, let's hope that Illisti was right and the fire doesn't spread out of the dark woods. After half an hour of hurried running, it appeared that Illisti had been right. No roaring wall of flames consumed them, so everyone was rather relieved about that. However, back behind them, a torrent of black smoke began to rise up into the sky. Thankfully, it did seem like the blaze wasn't moving in their direction. Black Nail nodded happily to himself. He'd been right to set the fire after all. Not only would it get rid of the spiders and allow them to use the road, but it would clear all the brush from atop the road there as well. Once the fire died down, getting to Hurst Crest would be much easier. Black Nail also planned on clearing the rest of the road, so that he could send minions to the other goblin camp quicker and safer. Maybe he could use the boars to do that? The rest of day went by slowly as Black Nail's party followed the old overgrown road back towards shelter. When it started to grow dark, they began to look for a place to settle down for the night. Up ahead, there was a large rock formation visible from the road. Its sharp stone point pierced the top of the forest canopy, so Black Nail decided to take some hobgoblin scouts and go check it out. A quick exploration of the huge rock formation revealed an excellent place to set up camp at its base. The ground was dry, the rocks provided shelter, and it was easily defendable. However, when Black Nail left his minions behind and circled around the rocks, he heard a noise off to his left. Frowning, the hobgoblin looked up over a boulder to see what had made the sound. There were any number of dangerous creatures that it could be, and setting up camp near them would be stupid. As he peeked over the rock, Black Nail froze in surprise. A strange and completely unexpected sight lay before him. Were those giant bugs? He was looking at two creatures about the size of a hobgoblin, but instead of standing straight up they moved across the ground on 6 skinny legs. Faded black carapace covered their very insect-like bodies, and their mouths were flanked by protruding mandibles. Both the creatures were walking backward as they dragged large objects behind them using their mandibles. One had a deer carcass, while the other was dragging a large green bush. Sensing Black Nail's presence, they suddenly stopped and spun to face him. Their eyes were dark empty pits as they studied the hobgoblin, and then they both reared up and hissed aggressively at him. Will of Iron 2. Surprised, Black Nail took a step back as a tingle of fear shot up his back. In front of him, the large insect-like creatures continued to hiss and glare. Black Nail had never seen anything remotely like them before. Cedar also hadn't mentioned anything similar, so he had no idea how to react. Were they dangerous? Should he run away or stand his ground and try to scare them into retreating? Black Nail had no idea what the right action was. Although, he vaguely remembered that Illisti had mentioned some mysterious creatures that sort of resembled these things. Boggats, he had called them. Both the black beasts began to scuttle forward, so Black Nail reacted instinctively. No giant bugs were going to chase him away from this place. He had already claimed it as his own. Enemies are here. To me, my minions. Fight for your great leader, Black Nail yelled as he drew his sword. Since he didn't know how to properly handle these boggats, the safest bet was just to kill them. He could probably manage that easily enough. Not only was he super strong, but he had allies nearby. Almost immediately after Black Nail's shout, there were replying yells from the nearby hobgoblins who were just out of sight, and they began to run over. While that was happening, the two boggats hissed and threw themselves at Black Nail. Their front limbs came up and reached for him, revealing 3 long curved claws on the end of each foot. Their large black eyes shone as their jagged mandibles opened wide enough to bite down on a human's head. Black Nail quickly dodged to the side and slashed at one of the outstretched claws. His blade hit the limb and knocked it aside but didn't appear to do much damage. That wasn't good. A frown appeared on the Black Nail's face as he caught his balance. The creature's shiny carapace was strong and thick. Playing it safe, Black Nail retreated a few steps to buy time for his allies to arrive, which they promptly did. Behind him, 2 hobgoblins ran around the spire of rock and then toward the fight. The arrival of more hobgoblins didn't appear to intimidate the bandits. If anything, it seemed to infuriate them. They hissed loudly like boiling tea kettles and shook with anger. One of them reared up on its back legs and clawed the air aggressively. It only stopped when the reinforcements reached Blacknail's side and became an immediate threat. Readying themselves to fight, the 2 bandits crouched down as if they were about to leap. "Oh, what are these things?" one of the hobgoblins asked in shock as he raised his weapon to guard Blacknail's flank. The second hobgoblin took up position on his chief's other side. "It doesn't matter. Just kill them," Blacknail replied as he leaned back to avoid the swing of a claw. It didn't look very clean. Following his orders, both the other hobgoblins immediately slashed at the bandits and went on the attack. Their swords bounced harmlessly off carapace, but Blacknail took the opportunity to step forward and kick the enemy to his left. The toe of his boot slammed into the head of the bandit, stunning it. Grinning as the thrill of the fight filled him, Blacknail didn't let up. Fiercely, he stabbed his sword down into one of the creature's shoulder joints. The blade caught for a moment, before sinking into the thin strip of pale flesh between the armor segments. The bandit immediately shrieked in pain. The shrill scream assaulted Blacknail's ears. He winced as he tugged his blade free and stepped back, but the pain felt like sweet victory. The wound seemed to cripple the bandit. Its arm went slack, and slobber began dripping from its mouth. It tried to attack again, but even its working front limb moved slowly and weakly. Blacknail grunted disdainfully as he blocked the blow, and then he kicked it in the head again. There was a wet crunch and the bandit collapsed onto the rocky ground. The remaining enemy was busy fighting the 2 other hobgoblins, but its companion's fall seemed to enrage it. The bandit ignored a blade aimed at its head and charged. The surprised hobgoblin's blade bounced off its armor as it leapt on top of him, and its mandibles clamped down on his arm. As the hobgoblin yelped, Blacknail pulled out a dagger and stabbed the bandit in the eye. The blade effortlessly sank deep into the creature's brain, and it began to spasm uncontrollably. Immediately, the hobgoblin it had tackled pushed it off himself and stood back up. His wounded arm was bleeding quite badly and he was covered in scratches. "Hey, I thought they'd be tougher." Illisti made bandits sound scary, Blacknail remarked as he studied the fallen creatures. They hadn't been weak, but there were a lot of things more dangerous than them in the green. The injured hobgoblin made a pained whine and cradled his arm. It was difficult to say how bad his injury was, but most the hobgoblins had been taught basic first aid, so he would probably live and recover. If he didn't, it wasn't Blacknail's problem. Back at his base, more goblins were transforming into hobgoblins all the time. He honestly didn't know what to do with them all. Blacknail started to sheath his sword, but a clattering noise drew his attention. Still on edge, he turned to look over at the edge of the rocky formation. There were several tall boulders blocking his sight, but as he watched, a group of dark shapes ran out from between the rocks. More enemies. Blacknail yelled to get his minions' attention. He counted 5 bandits this time. That was bad. Even if he defeated these, he couldn't be sure there weren't more on the way. The 5 bandits took a moment to study the hobgoblins and their fallen kin, before scuttling forward to attack. "I don't like these things," Blacknail observed sourly as he readied himself to fight again. Judging by their behavior, it seemed like bandits were territorial and moved in large packs. It also looked like they didn't care much about individual survival, which wasn't a good trait to encounter in an enemy. The 5 bandits hissed and spat angrily as they determinedly charged the hobgoblins. Blacknail and his 2 minions stepped closer and raised their weapons as the bandits closed in. Blacknail grimaced as he studied the enraged creatures. This was going to be a hard fight if his own reinforcements didn't arrive soon. Just then, there was yell from behind Blacknail. "I'm here to join the fight." "Wow, what are those?" "They look mean," Kida shouted excitedly as she ran over to join Blacknail and his minions. Blacknail grimaced and sighed in exasperation. Why did it have to be Kida? Anyone but her would have been much more useful. She was useless. However, quite unexpectedly, the scuttling mob of attackers suddenly stopped just outside of the reach of the hobgoblins' weapons. Instead of charging the surprised hobgoblins, they froze in place and threw a series of surprised glances at Kida. Uncertainty shone in their large black eyes as they studied the human girl. When she reached the hobgoblins, the bandits began furiously clicking at each other, and then they backed away and fled back the way they had come. What? Why? Blacknail exclaimed angrily as he watched them go. Why had they chosen to flee all of a sudden? Was it possible that they'd been afraid of Kida but not him? No, that was impossible. Kida was as weak as her skinny arms and fat head made her look. Apparently, Kida had simply been the first of Blacknail's allies to arrive. From the same direction, a mix of humans and hobgoblins rushed out from behind a pile of rocks. Glancing over his shoulder, Blacknail saw Geralt among them. Ha, look at those creepy things run, Kida laughed as she put a hand on Blacknail's shoulder. I sure scared them away. They're no match for us. No, you didn't scare them away. Don't say that. Blacknail replied as he brushed her hand away. The bandits were now completely out of sight, but they hadn't fled from Kida. What in all the hells were those things? Geralt asked as his group joined up with Blacknail's. Several of the humans looked spooked. They were bandits, Blacknail explained authoritatively. He was fairly certain that was right, and no one else here would know more than him. I thought those were a myth, and a lot smaller, one of the men from shelter remarked in surprise. Weren't those supposed to steal chickens unless you put out old shoes for them? The humans began talking amongst themselves nervously. The two dead bandits were still laid out on the ground alongside the bush and dead deer that they'd been dragging. They don't even have real feet. What would they do with boots? Kida observed as she pointed at a carcass. Everyone ignored her, and Black Nail took a moment to lean down and study the fallen creatures. They were certainly strange looking. Like bugs, their bodies were divided into 3 segments and they had hard shells. They also reminded Black Nail of mimics, especially their eyes, although their body shape and coloring were completely different. They also lacked anything that resembled a mimic's fake foliage. Sniffing one of the dead boggets, the hobgoblin's nostrils were filled with a rich earthy musk. It had an undercurrent of what smelled like a mix of decaying matter. Strange. Black Nail was reminded of the piles harvesters made, but these creatures were obviously not related to the beetles at all, despite a few small superficial similarities. Do you think those creatures, the boggets or whatever, will be coming back? Geralt asked. Black Nail frowned and stood back up before beginning to walk toward the rocks that the boggets had disappeared behind. Good question. Let's see where they went. A lot of the humans from shelter seemed confused. One of them scratched his head as he spoke up. I still don't understand. Aren't boggets like evil spirits? I don't think they're supposed to be real, or this ugly. These are boggets. Do you know more about the green than me? I'm the ranger here, Black Nail replied as he reached the rocks and glanced behind them. Stupid confusing humans. Obviously, he was an expert on boggets, even if he knew next to nothing about them. There were no boggets behind the boulder, just a lot more tall splinters of rock. After signaling for his hobgoblin minions to come up and cover him, Black Nail began to sniff out the fleeing boggets' trail. He followed their scent around the huge stone pillar and through the smaller boulders for a few moments before it disappeared into a slender fissure. Black Nail stopped and stared warily at the dark opening. It was located at the base of a pile of boulders and its black interior was impenetrable to his sight. Geralt had arrived and looked over Black Nail's shoulder. The boggets went down into there. Yes, that's why I'm staring at it, Black Nail replied dryly. So, what does this development mean for us, exactly? It means we shouldn't camp anywhere near here and that we should double our night watch, Black Nail replied as he turned away from the hole in the ground. There were several things about this situation he didn't like. Most importantly, he had no idea how many boggets were down there in the deep roads. There could be dozens or hundreds of them just waiting underground for the right time to attack. Secondly, the creatures obviously had no problem seeing in the dark, which meant a night attack was likely. No one disagreed with Black Nail's plan to leave the area even though it was getting dark. The 2 bogget corpses were a plain reminder that something strange was going and that they weren't safe. Everyone immediately began packing up and they were soon back on the road. The sun was almost halfway under the horizon now and it was starting to get difficult for the humans to see, but they didn't have any other choice but to put some distance between themselves and the rock formation. Luckily, after about half an hour, the scouts found another good camping spot, on a hill next to the overgrown road. It wasn't quite as nice as the old one, but a quick exploration revealed no nearby caves or angry boggets. As everyone else was settling down for the night, Black Nail stood at the peak of the hill and looked around confidently. Geralt and Kida were with him, and it was truly dark out now. The stars and moon both shone overhead in the black sky. Yep, we should be safe here. As both the leader and our best ranger, I led us to a good spot, the hobgoblin remarked proudly. Geralt grunted and looked over the trees to the west. I wish the horizon wasn't still on fire, though. Black Nail frowned. From atop the hill, they could all see that a long stretch of forest off in the distance was burning brightly. The orange glow of the flames was obvious in the dark of night. It's not moving in our direction, and it won't spread beyond the old woods. Illisti said so, the hobgoblin remarked with more confidence than he truly felt. Kida just laughed. I think it's as pretty and sharp as silver. It's definitely the biggest fire I've ever seen, and I've burned down a few buildings. You can see the light reflecting off the clouds. It's beautiful, Farrer agreed as he emerged from the darkness to join them. The burning is so bright, yet so far away. I wish I could feel its heat. I believe that would almost certainly be fatal, Geralt had observed dryly. Since there was little else for anyone to say and it was starting to get very late, everyone went their separate ways and laid down for the night. Amidst the other hobgoblins, where it was safest, Black Nail snuggled into his blankets and went to sleep. The next morning, Black Nail woke up and got everyone moving. It only took a few kicks and shouts into lazy people's ears. Once that was done, a quick chat with his sentries revealed that no one had spotted any strange activity during the night, but there was no reason to stick around. Black Nail shuddered as a shiver went down his spine. He had a bad feeling in his gut about the boggets. Their black armor and segmented bodies were creepy and icky, but it was more than that. He couldn't explain exactly why they bothered him so much, but his instincts were telling him that they were dangerous, and that he hadn't seen the last of the cave-dwelling scavengers. The party and their creaky wagon traveled along the old overgrown road for several hours before nearing their goal. Except for a flight of harpies flying overhead and the distant bellowing of an ogre, they didn't encounter anything dangerous. Once the forest parted and the fields around shelter came into sight, the group split up. Most of the humans headed for the town, while the hobgoblins began hiking over to their camp. The humans took the wagon, but almost all of its contents were divided up among the hobgoblins for them to carry. The only human traveling with the hobgoblins was the smelter from Hurst Crest that Farrer had chosen. I'll be along to check on you soon, he told his mute daughter before handing her off to Geralt. Geralt gave the man a dignified nod. I promise that she will be well cared for. Shelter is a rather safe and welcoming place. The people there are rustic but well-meaning. She's in good hands. You won't find better. I've talked to some of the men from there, and I believe you're right, the man replied before giving his daughter a reassuring smile. The little girl gave him a sad nod back and clutched her doll. Farrer had been rather stubborn about making sure the craftsman came with them right away, instead of going to shelter first. Blacknail didn't care, but Farrer was apparently quite impatient to get to work and hadn't been willing to accept any delay. I'm going to go with them to shelter. I need to make sure my underlings are taken care of and stuff. Some of them have been complaining about the adventure we just went on, Kid had told Blacknail. He didn't care. Once Geralt's group was moving, Blacknail led the others to the goblin settlement. Weighed down by loot and gear, it took the tired hobgoblins a few hours, but they got there without a problem. As usual, before entering through the gate, Blacknail climbed up one of the nearby hills so that he could look down on the entire settlement. It was much the same, a crude wooden wall around a bunch of rocky hills and primitive structures, but he noticed two things that had changed. The longhouse that had been under construction when he'd left was done and the beginnings of a completely new one had been put down. Blacknail sighed as he studied them. So many hobgoblins. Hey, I was actually expecting much worse than this, the bearded craftsman remarked matter-of-factly as he stared down the hill. I can see some smoke rising from those clay furnaces over there. You weren't lying about that. Blacknail sighed. It keeps growing. I can't stop it. I built those furnaces, Farrer announced proudly. The man grunted and began walking toward the gate. Well, let's get going. I can't say I ever thought I'd be doing anything like this, but I've been expecting to die in misery for a while now, and this can't be worse. The gods have given me hope, so I'd be a fool not to grasp at it, no matter how treacherous the way through the dark is. Farrer laughed with gleeful excitement as he followed after the man. The light is from a fire burning bright. I can't wait. We're going to burn so much together. It will be so very glorious. Will of Iron 3. Once the travelers descended down the hill and entered the goblin settlement below, Farrer didn't waste any time. He immediately dragged the craftsman toward his workshop, and soon they were both out of sight. Blacknail had his own business to get down to, so he headed off in a different direction. As was usual, it didn't take him long to track down his target, Gob. As Blacknail's second in command, he had been left in charge during Blacknail's absence and would be able to update his boss about what had happened while he was gone. Gob was standing in the empty patch of land in the middle of the settlement, and he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by over 24 other hobgoblins. It looked like they were doing training. Some of them were just watching, but most of the hobgoblins were sparring with wooden blades made from carved branches. Rather than hard combat, the training seemed to be more about self-control and form. None of the hobgoblins were going all out, and Gob was watching them carefully just in case. He wandered among the sparring hobgoblins while occasionally giving out advice and orders. Blacknail nodded in approval. Discipline was more important than skill. Without the ability to control and suppress their emotions, a hobgoblin was more of a liability than a useful tool. Seeing Blacknail walking his way, Gob stopped what he was doing and hurried over to meet his boss. Their chief's presence also drew the attention of many of the other hobgoblins. They glanced his way and more than a few of them began to pretend to work harder. Once he reached Blacknail's side, Gob immediately gave him a quick salute. Welcome back, bossiest one. As always, I'm ready to obey your every command. Blacknail grimaced. That's not a compliment. Being bossy is a bad thing. Gob flinched. Sorry, greatest of hobgoblins. I meant no offense. Just don't do it again, Blacknail replied. He knew Gob had misspoken. Gob wouldn't dare insult him, especially to his face. A brief conversation was all it took for Blacknail to learn that nothing all that interesting or unexpected had occurred while he'd been gone. He then took a few minutes to fill Gob in on what had happened during the trip Hurst Crest. And so I killed the humongous glowing god and conquered Hurst Crest all by myself. Then, I gave it to Elicity because I already have a human town, Blacknail said in conclusion. Truly your strength and power is without match. No man or god can stand against you. Yep, I'm pretty amazing, Blacknail agreed with a nod of approval. Gob sometimes had a way with words. Sometimes they were even the right words. Is there anything you wish me to do now? Gob asked eagerly. He seemed to want to serve. For now, you can continue training the hobgoblins. That's important, but there is some stuff I want you do later. Like what, boss? The cave I am staying in now is not worthy of my greatness. I'm going to need my minions to build me a mansion. It needs to be bigger than all the other buildings and be incredibly impressive looking. Everyone who looks at it should know that they need to respect me, Blacknail explained. I will begin work this very day. It will be larger even than any building in shelter. Gob replied enthusiastically. Blacknail smiled and nodded appreciatively. That's a very good point. Make sure you do that. It wouldn't do to have anyone in shelter looking down on him because they had a larger house than him. It was very important that all the humans there knew who was in charge. He was. Before Blacknail could think up any more important features his house would need, his train of thought was interrupted by a scream. Closing his mouth, Blacknail glanced over his shoulder just in time to see a flaming goblin run out from behind a building. It was actually the goblin's shirt that was on fire, but he certainly seemed to be in pain. He didn't stop screaming as he ran past the hobgoblins and toward the creek outside the settlement walls. Blacknail sighed as he watched the goblin disappear. He was certain he knew where that goblin had just come from. Blacknail grimaced as he turned back to Gob. You'd better go make sure that goblin doesn't set anything important on fire. I think I should go see what Farrer is doing. He'd thought he could leave the fire-obsessed hobgoblin alone with his new toys, but obviously he'd been wrong. Very wrong. Leaving Gob to his own duties, Blacknail headed through the settlement and toward Farrer's workshop. Soon, the hobgoblin's workshop came into sight. It was a fairly large building made of mud bricks with a tiled roof. The original had been made of wood, but it had burnt down. Several clay furnaces of different sizes and shapes surrounded the workshop, and off to one side was a pavilion made from 4 tall wooden posts with stitched hides stretched between them. Piles of materials were stored under there. Farrer and his recently acquired human helper were standing out in front of the building. The human seemed to just be watching with an amused yet more than slightly frightened look on his face, but Farrer was directing a dozen goblins as they dug a hole and gathered up piles of bricks and clay. All the goblins were running in every direction while Farrer yelled and waved his hands in the air. "What are you doing?" Black Nail shouted as he stomped over. He needed to be loud to get everyone's attention. "We're working fast. Soon, but not soon enough, we will be melting iron in the cleansing fire of a new furnace. The secret is the air and the waterless wood. Fire breathes, you see. You need to give it more air so it can grow stronger and hot enough to melt metal." Farrer laughed as he turned to give Black Nail a mad grin. He was practically vibrating with excitement. Black Nail gave him a cold stare. "I just saw a goblin run by. He was on fire." Undaunted, Farrer shrugged and kept grinning. "That happens. We're doing science." Black Nail stared at Farrer for several long seconds. He wasn't sure what he could say that would get through to the other hobgoblin. Farrer seemed to be in the middle of some sort of mad fit. "Flaming goblins aren't safe. This is my territory. If you burn anything or anyone important then I won't allow you to keep burning things," he eventually replied. Farrer's smile didn't slip. "Don't worry, boss. I can be safe and fast at the same time." "I don't think that's true at all," Black Nail countered. Farrer didn't seem to be paying attention, though. He turned back to the working goblins and yelled several new orders at them. Instead, it was the human who answered. Still looking more than a little afraid, he turned to Black Nail and gave him a polite nod of greeting. He certainly really likes his work, too much really. "Don't worry, though. I'll keep things under control. This is just a small test and should be fairly safe." "Good. Just try not to get burned to death. That would annoy Illisti and the people of Shelter," Black Nail told the man. As he was talking, a goblin ran over with several large pieces of raw iron that had been taken out of one of the nearby caves. Some of the caverns were quite extensive and went on for a long time before ending. All the commotion attracted some other attention. Imp's workshop was nearby, and he wandered out to see what was going on. The hobgoblin mage carried the tall metal staff Black Nail had won from a human mage in one hand as he walked over. "You're back, Chief. Did you encounter any magic on your trip?" Imp asked. Black Nail sighed despondently in response. What was with some of his hobgoblins and obsessions with weird and dangerous things? Sure, it made them too useful to smack or kill, but it also made them dangerous and frustrating to deal with. Also, they were generally too needy to be good minions. They forgot to be properly respectful, and why did they need him to constantly solve their problems? He was the leader, not their subordinate. "I did find some magic, and if you grovel a few times I'll tell you about it," Black Nail told the mage crossly. Immediately, Imp did as he was told and bowed while praising his chieftain. A few minutes of this satisfied Black Nail, so he informed Imp about all the mana crystals and magical powers he'd encountered on his journey. The mention of the crystal that had controlled the slime seemed to interest him most of all. "How amazing! Avorlus will be interested to learn of this." "Yes, very much," Imp exclaimed excitedly. Once Imp's curiosity had been sated, Black Nail wandered off. He had several other important things that needed done before he could settle down and take a well-deserved break. Ever since he'd been forced to leave Scamp behind at the other goblin camp, Black Nail had been distracted by thoughts about what the hobgoblins with him were getting up to. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were conspiring against him. Now that they were safely away from his direct supervision, it was possible they might use all the skills he'd taught them against their rightful leader. The ungrateful scum. Thankfully, Illisti had given some good advice on how to manage minions that were far away, and Black Nail had some good ideas of his own. He knew that in the future he would be forced to send lots of his minions off to different places where Gob and him couldn't supervise them, so it was time to put some precautionary measures into place. Hobgoblins couldn't be trusted. The pig pen had grown a lot larger since the last time Black Nail had seen them. They were still next to a wooden shack with a thatch roof, but now the muddy pen itself was almost twice as large as it had been, although it was still encircled by a ramshackle fence made up of tied-together branches sticking out from the ground. As expected, there were several large pigs and boars wallowing in the mud. Even though they were all young, some of them were already much heavier looking than Black Nail, and they would undoubtedly keep growing. The boar that had fathered them had been many times a hobgoblin's size before his death at Black Nail's hands. "Is there anyone inside? Your leader is here. Come and praise me," Black Nail yelled as he approached the hut. The last time he'd been here the hobgoblin in charge had been rolling around in the mud with the pigs, but he didn't seem to be there now. Unless he was under the mud, or had been eaten by the pigs. A series of thuds from inside the hut drew Black Nail's attention, and a few seconds later a scrawny hobgoblin stepped out and saluted him. Black Nail didn't recognize him, but that was probably because he was fairly clean instead of coated in mud. "Thank you for visiting this pathetic hobgoblin, Chief. How can I help you?" the hobgoblin asked. Black Nail gave him a stern nod. "I'm going to have a job for you and your animals soon. How many of them are strong and tame enough to be put to work out in the green?" "I have around a dozen good strong pigs, and soon I will have even more. They are good boys and girls, and because of your incredibly wise orders, the hunters are still bringing in more young pigs to join my herd." "Ah, right," Black Nail mused. He'd given that order a while back. It had mostly been to help clear land for planting and create an emergency meat supply, but now the beasts would serve another purpose. It was a good thing he hadn't cancelled the order after those two hobgoblins had been mauled to death by an angry boar that had objected to them stealing his children. What exactly do you want my herd to do? The hobgoblin herder asked. I will be building some roads. So, I'm going to need them to uproot a lot of bushes and haul logs and materials around. They can do that, no problem. They are good, smart animals. Yes, they are. You really seem to like the pigs a lot. You're always here with them, Black Nail observed. Obviously, this was another hobgoblin obsessed with something weird. I like being with them and playing with them. They're my friends. Unlike other hobgoblins, they're nice to me and bring me presents, instead of hitting me. Also, they smell much better and are much cleaner than hobgoblins. Probably, Black Nail admitted. Hobgoblins weren't big on personal hygiene, but they did like hitting each other. A closer look at the hobgoblin in front of him, revealed several scars on arms and face. He seemed to have lost a few fights, which wasn't a surprise given how scrawny he was. Well, it wasn't Black Nail's problem, and he seemed happy enough to be useful. After a brief conversation about the pigs, Black Nail quickly excused himself. He was getting tired and experience had taught him that hobgoblins could talk about their fixations forever without end. Black Nail wandered the camp and spoke to a few more hobgoblins before going to get something to eat and relaxing for the rest of the day. He scowled at the entrance to his cave and grumbled to himself in dissatisfaction before entering it. He really needed to get his mansion built. An important leader like himself needed a huge fancy dwelling that instilled awe and fear in all his minions, and a great leader certainly didn't live in hole in the ground. Black Nail spent some of the next 2 days relaxing, but during his absence a lot of small problems and work no one else could do had built up. Instead of eating and sleeping all the time, he was forced to go around and manage a lot of hobgoblins that wanted his input or orders. Only when all that was done did he have time to rest and recuperate from all his traveling. Why was being the boss so much work? Farrer and his new helper were also quite busy. They had finished constructing their new smelting furnace last night and had lit a small fire inside it to harden its clay walls. That fire had burned out over the night, allowing the furnace to cool. The device was a cylinder that was open at the top and made from bricks held together by clay. It rose up from a mound of earth and there was a big hole at the bottom of it. A pile of black ashes had spilled out from that hole. They couldn't use it yet, though. Instead, they were gathering up wood and tinder to create fuel for the furnace. Once the wood was stacked up vertically, they slathered the pile with clay and completely covered it except for a few holes at the bottom and one at the very top. The wood and tinder were then set on a light, and once it was nicely aflame the holes at the bottom were sealed. When the fire had died down, the mound was torn open to reveal the charred black remains of the wood. Apparently, this burnt wood was called charcoal and it burned hotter than normal wood. Black Nail found that very doubtful and it made no sense to him. Shouldn't wood that had already been burnt be less useful as fuel? Well, whatever. Farrer and the human craftsmen were the experts. It took a while for the charcoal to cool down, so Farrer was forced to wait another day before attempting to actually melt some raw iron ore into usable ingots. When the next morning came, Black Nail woke up and got to work again. He grinned in excitement as he shoved the cloth that hung across his door and stepped outside. Today he would be taking several steps toward the fulfillment of the plan he'd begun the moment he'd recovered from the death of his master. Warwick didn't know it, but his death was inevitably stalking closer. The first thing Black Nail did was go and check on what Farrer had accomplished yesterday, and make sure he was still alive and completely intact. The hobgoblin had still been working when Black Nail went to sleep, but he found the fire-obsessed tinkerer already up and working on the smelting furnace. He'd already loaded some iron ore and charcoal into the smelter. Now several goblins were taking turns at the bellows that he'd acquired somewhere and was using to pump air into the structure. This is a small furnace and won't make much metal, but if it works I can build a bigger one, Farrer explained. And I'll be able to go to shelter and see my daughter for a few days while he sets up the next phase of our experiment, the human craftsman added. He looked and sounded tired, which wasn't surprising. He'd been sleeping in Farrer's workshop. Black Nail doubted Farrer was anything like a good roommate, especially over the past few days. He'd been a little intense about this project. So, if this works then you will be able to make iron tools? Black Nail asked. He wanted to make sure he was going to get something useful out of all this rather tiring fuss. There had already been another flaming goblin incident. Yes, I'm told there is a blacksmith in shelter that will be able to forge the metal for you, the man replied. Good, Black Nail exclaimed gleefully as he rubbed his hands together. It was time to bend the people of shelter completely to his will. Turning away from the workers, Black Nail headed over to gather up some minions to send to shelter and invite the important people there over to see his new furnace in action. The pieces were in place. All he had to do was tell the simple humans what they wanted to hear and give them some meaningless trinkets and they would be clay in his hands. Today, his settlement would become a power to be reckoned with and finally began to change the north to suit its master's vengeful will. Will of Iron 4. It took a few hours for the humans from shelter to arrive at the goblin settlement. However, all the people Black Nail had been hoping to see were there. Escorted by his minions, the large group of people walked through the front gate and into the settlement. The mix of villagers and former bandits numbered over 40. Tannen was there, alongside Gerald, Kada, Avorless, and Beardy. With a friendly grin on his face, Black Nail walked over to them and gestured at his surroundings with wide open arms. Welcome to my camp. It's not much, but the walls keep the wind and animals away. It was Tannen that stepped forward. The older man with a thick grey beard gave the hobgoblin an appraising look for a second before nodding politely. Thank you for having us. I hear you've got a proper mess of interesting things that you want to show off. Yep. You'll be very impressed. I'm pretty amazing, Black Nail responded cheerfully. The crowd of humans promptly followed Black Nail over to Farrer's workshop. The hobgoblin had just finished opening up the furnace and extracting the refined iron a few hours ago. Still excited, Farrer directed their gazes toward where two chunks of ore were cooling on a rock off to one side. Black Nail didn't find them all that interesting, but the blacksmith Tannen had brought along seemed impressed. These nuggets of pig iron look like they've been made properly, he observed. I can see that the slag has been melted out of them. Yes, I can work ore of this quality into proper wrought iron that we can use. Black Nail sighed. Even after going through the furnace and cooling down, the metal Farrer had refined was next to useless. Apparently, it needed to be heated up again in a different furnace and hammered. It was a good thing Farrer was so obsessed with this stuff. It was far too complex and tedious for Black Nail to figure out. As Farrer beamed at the blacksmith's words, Tannen nodded and turned to Black Nail. And you're willing to trade pig iron like this to us regularly? Of course, we're neighbors. We should get along and help each other. Black Nail replied cheerfully. Right, what do you want in return for this generosity? Tannen huffed. Black Nail smiled and made a dismissive gesture with one hand. Just more of what you're already doing. You can trade me food like cheese. Also, I will pay you to help my minions plant crops and to teach them to make stuff. There are lots of things my minions can't do, such as blacksmithing. You could also help me make wrought iron, Farrer suggested. Tannen frowned skeptically. Oh, why would we want to teach you any sort of forging? Giving away our monopoly on that skill wouldn't seem to be in our interest. Your iron is useless without it. Black Nail just smiled. He knew that the iron was valuable to the humans since they couldn't produce the metal themselves, and they had a lot of tools that had degraded over the years, but they had no idea how valuable their knowledge and expertise was. With it, Black Nail could change the world and become the most powerful chieftain in the north. My minions are going to need a lot of simple little iron tools like nails and arrowheads. Your one blacksmith would need to work non-stop to make them all, or he could take a few hobgoblin assistants to help him with the small simple things while he concentrates on your own needs. And what happens when you no longer need our skills? Why would you continue to supply us with iron? Black Nail shrugged. We can learn anything we need from Hearst Crest, even if the craftsman they lent us doesn't know. It's better to be friendly with us now, so we will give you better trades later. It will take a long time for us to learn even part of your skills. Tannen exchanged looks with the blacksmith and then sighed. I suppose that's an acceptable offer. Black Nail snorted. He was more than willing to barter, since it cost him so little, but there was no ignoring the forced disparity between the two groups. While Shelter had a large population, there was no way it could survive in a long-term struggle against Black Nail's minions. In fact, they'd already been falling into ruin before Black Nail's arrival. They needed his goodwill. After the bargaining with Tannen had completed, Geralt had walked over to Black Nail. He'd been studying the workshop with obvious enthusiasm and interest, which was a little odd since he'd never been one for hands-on work. This is all rather amazing. Geralt had remarked excitedly. There is no archaeological evidence to suggest that goblins and hobgoblins ever worked iron before. They only used stone tools. I'm seeing history in the making here. I wonder if in the future anyone will ever dig up this site and study its artifacts. Black Nail blinked. Just wait until Geralt had saw what he was going to do with the iron. I do amazing things all the time, since I'm the greatest hobgoblin who has ever lived, Black Nail remarked before leading the group away from the smelting furnace. While he was showing off, there were some other places he wanted to show them. The next stop on their tour was the clay ovens. There several goblins were feeding the fires and loading up an oven full of newly made pots. The process had been improved a lot since the goblins had first tried it. The specially made kills damaged or destroyed far fewer pots. The pots themselves were also much more complex and artistic. The goblins that were making them liked carving little figures and patterns into the clay. Hunting and war were common scenes, although most of them just looked like squiggly lines. After moving away from the kills, Black Nail took them to the tanning racks where the animal hides gathered from hunting were hanging up and drying. He knew humans wouldn't find it all that impressive, but the hides were worth something in trade. Several of the humans were rather impressed by some of the wolf skins had acquired. And this is where my giant mansion is going to be built, Black Nail said as he pointed to a large area of stony ground that had been cleared and leveled. Everyone stopped to look. Hey, but right now, it's just an empty patch of dirt, Geralt had observed carefully. Maybe, but when it's done it will be bigger than everyone else's homes, including yours, Black Nail replied crossly before moving on. How many goblins and hobgoblins are here in this village now? I can't seem to figure it out by looking since all these goblins haven't stopped running around, and they seem to pack themselves into houses like berries in a bear's mouth, Tannen asked as they walked back to the main gate. Black Nail shrugged. No idea. More are always popping out of nowhere. Gob might know. Tannen frowned and glanced over toward one of the longhouses for a moment. They'd finished visiting most the interesting places within the camp, with the notable exceptions of the gold cave and Imp's hut. The people of Shelter didn't need to know about the gold or Black Nail's access to magic. Having magic around made some people twitchy and unreasonably paranoid. Black Nail was one of those people, but for now, the benefits of Imp's magic outweighed the risks. Why are we headed back to the entrance? Tannen asked as his group followed Black Nail. You aren't kicking us out already, are you? No, I just want to show you something and suggest an idea, Black Nail replied as they reached the gate and looked out at the forest. What is it? Moving through the green is hard and dangerous, yes? Even coming here isn't easy for you. That's true enough. Black Nail raised a hand and pointed at the path that led back to the humans' village. But you humans build roads to make it faster and safer to travel from place to place. We could do that. My minions could cut a road from here to shelter and then from shelter to Hearst Crest. That would make it easier to trade. Tannen perked up. Hey, that's an interesting idea. We've been disconnected from the larger world for too long. What would you need from us? Mostly just advice, Black Nail replied. We'd be more than happy to help you out with such a project. Of course, even with a proper road, the green is dangerous to travel through. My minions could patrol it and build shelters beside it for people to rest at. They wouldn't be fancy, but they would keep animals out, Black Nail replied. He had something like the feral goblins' half-buried huts in mind. They would be able to hold back anything up to an enraged troll, which they would still at least slow down. After a bit more conversation, Tannen agreed to send over some people to help with Black Nail's latest project. The group then headed back inside the settlement to get some lunch. As Tannen stepped back to speak to some of his people, Murderous emerged from the crowd and headed over to Black Nail's side. It has been a while since our last conversation, the mage remarked. Still doing dangerous magic stuff? Black Nail asked him. Murderous rolled his eyes. Yes, which is what I wanted to talk to you about. Oh. Black Nail mused. Should he take a step back? I've learned almost everything of value I can from Murderous and taught him what he needs know to make your elixir in return, as per our deal. Thus, I find myself with a surplus of free time and yet a severe deficit of proper facilities to work with. You can't go back to Dagger Point. The other mages still want to kill you, Black Nail pointed out. True, but since I'm stuck out here in these savage lands, I might as well take advantage of any opportunities that fall into my lap. Murderous has been telling me about your visit to Hearst Crest. I was hoping to make a visit there to examine the crystal cavern you found. I've never actually ventured to see such a source before. Black Nail absently scratched the side of his head. I'm planning to send some minions that way in a few days, but I don't think the vampires like mages much. They call them wise men, but they seem to think they're too dangerous to have around. Yes, they are fascinating creatures. I'd seen them referenced in scholarly works, but never heard of anyone seeing any in real life. I would love to be able to examine them. Don't try it, Black Nail advised the mage. Murderous grunted sourly. I'm not suicidal. I understand their enmity toward mages, and it's not completely unreasonable. If I do go to Hearst Crest, I will endeavor to stay out of sight and be as unobtrusive as possible. Until you begin playing with the magic exploding crystals in their basement. Even then. Black Nail sighed. I'll think about it. By now they'd reached the cooking area, so everyone began to sit down. There were a bunch of crude stools and chairs scattered around the fire pit. Black Nail had gotten the stew started a few hours ago, so it was done now. After serving Black Nail first, the hobgoblin in charge of the cooking began handing out bowls to everyone else, which were delivered by goblins. Soon, everyone was eating and talking amongst themselves. Black Nail nodded happily as he observed what was happening. All the humans looked relaxed, despite being surrounded by hobgoblins. The people of Shelter were growing used to the hobgoblins. Not too long ago they would have been terrified by the presence of even one. While Black Nail was eating, Geralt and Beardy walked over and sat down next to him. You seem to be keeping yourself pleasantly busy with all this work, Geralt observed. Yay, it's suspicious. You're a lazy beast at heart, Beardy added. Black Nail couldn't deny that. Geralt sighed. I think, we're both simply curious as to why you've suddenly become so interested in building a series of roads. That seems like an incredibly difficult and thankless task for someone with your priorities and inclinations. Black Nail weighed his options for a moment before answering. He wasn't sure how honest he wanted to be, but a moment later, he decided that there was no point holding anything back. I keep having to send minions away to do missions, but I'm worried about how loyal they will be. You can't trust hobgoblins. However, Illisti said that better roads will help me keep a better eye on what is happening in other places. That's the sanest thing you've ever said, the bit about hobgoblins, anyway, Beardy remarked. Geralt looked doubtful. Aren't you being a little paranoid? It's not like the other hobgoblins are all trying to kill you. Quite a few of them are trying to kill me, Black Nail replied with an amused grin. But I'm very hard to poison, and after I executed the last few idiots that tried to ambush me, they're all too afraid to try again. Beardy seemed to find this funny. He let out a loud belly laugh. Geralt winced in surprise. Well, maybe, what you're missing is a cause or mission. Roads don't seem like a terrible idea, but a united sense of purpose and identity seem like a better idea to me if you want to inspire loyalty in your followers. What's that? Black Nail asked. Like human countries have flags and symbols, so that no matter where they go they know who and what they serve. A country gives people a shared identity so that they can work together and remember that what serves the whole group also serves them individuals. It's like a story they live, I suppose. It makes them part of something greater than themselves. Black Nail frowned thoughtfully. I don't think that would work for hobgoblins. We're a little different. Hobgoblins were not the same as humans. Despite what Geralt had seemed to think, their minds worked very differently. Humans were herd animals in a way that hobgoblins weren't. Hobgoblins formed tribes, but those tribes were always a tool for the hobgoblin to use, not something they would sacrifice themselves for. It was even difficult for hobgoblins to see a tribe as something more than a collection of individuals. In a lot of gangs or the navy, they just get tattoos, Beardy remarked. Black Nail perked up. Skin art? That could work. Yes, at the very least it would allow the tribe to recognize its own. Having the symbol of Black Nail's authority etched in their skin might also make a lot of hobgoblins hesitate about betraying him, especially if that symbol gave them status. Hobgoblins liked being better than others, and wouldn't want to lose that. Grinning excitedly, Black Nail turned to Beardy. Can you make tattoos? I guess I can. I mean I've got one and seen it done a few times. It didn't look that hard, as long as you don't want anything too fancy. Good, I want to give all my hobgoblins marks. What exactly do I get out of this? That sounds like a lot of work, Beardy remarked coldly. Black Nail reached into his coat and pulled out a small lump of gold, which he tossed to Beardy. After catching it, the man blinked in stunned disbelief at the object in his hands. You're just going to give this to me? Beardy asked in surprise. Black Nail chuckled. Yes, where would you go? Beardy scowled but tucked the nugget of gold away into his own coat. I suppose you have a deal. I can teach you how to create tattoos. With the deal complete, Black Nail began to turn away from the humans, but Geralt had coughed politely to get his attention. You should at least try to come up with a name for both this settlement and your tribe. If for no other reason than so people know what to call you. That's a good idea. I will have to think of some names. I'm great at naming things, just ask Gob. Black Nail exclaimed happily. For some reason, Geralt had grimaced sourly. By this time, everyone had finished eating and all the conversations were starting to die down, so Black Nail ended the lunch break. He talked to Tannen briefly before saying goodbye to everyone and sending them back to shelter with some hobgoblin scouts as guides. Only Beardy remained behind to do some experiments on giving goblins tattoos. Several were knocked over the head and volunteered for his use. Once the visitors were gone, Black Nail began organizing things for the next day. There was no point waiting around. Tomorrow was going to be a big day. For the first time ever, he was going to muster the full power of the settlement he'd built, an organized horde of goblins, and put it to work. The green would be pushed back and Black Nail's route south would open up before him. First, he would build the road, and then he would march an army down it to strike at his master's unsuspecting enemies. Will of Iron 5. After making plans with Gob, Black Nail began gathering up all the tools he would need to begin building a road through the green. After that, he spent the rest of the day selecting hobgoblins to lead work crews and threatening to gut them like fish if they didn't have their crews assembled tomorrow at dawn. Then, he went to bed. Screaming and growling menacingly at people was hard work. The next morning, when the yellow orb of the sun began to peak above the horizon, Black Nail had breakfast while all the work crews hurriedly assembled themselves outside his home. It was a great display of how amazing and inspiring his leadership skills were. Had there ever been a better leader than him? Undoubtedly not. He was unprecedented. When Black Nail finished eating and headed out to begin working on the road to shelter, he brought along a large mob that was a mix of hobgoblins, goblins, and boars. They crossed the cleared fields and swiftly reached the trees. There, the goblins cleared bushes and moved debris, while the hobgoblins used steel-headed axes from Hurst Crest to chop down trees. The boars were mostly used to drag or move the trees once they had fallen. It was slow-going and very loud. The repetitive sound of axes splintering wood filled the air while goblins screamed at each other. The idea was to create a road that a wagon could travel across easily. Black Nail also wanted to clear the area around the road of all the brush and cover that could be used by predators to ambush travelers. That meant the ground had to be flattened and the trees to either side of it had to be cut down. As Black Nail watched from a safe distance, there was an ear-splitting crash as a tree hit the ground. As soon as the ground stopped shaking, a swarm of goblins and hobgoblins ran over and began to disassemble it. Branches were hacked off and boars were tied in place so they could begin dragging the tree out of the way. Teams of goblins began digging up the stump, while goblin overseers with spears kept watch to make sure none of their kin tried to leave or slack off. Moving the fallen trees took a lot of muscle power, but Black Nail had a lot of goblins. With some rope, and a lot of pointed encouragement and supervision, it was entirely possible for them to pull the logs. All this activity made Black Nail feel proud. Miraculously, it was happening with very little intervention from him. He simply pointed the lead hobgoblins in the right direction, and they kept the others in line. There was a pyramid of authority and Black Nail only had to worry about punishing the people at the top of it if there were any screw-ups. That meant he didn't personally have to deal with all the stupid and disorderly goblins at the bottom of the pyramid. As Black Nail was congratulating himself, Farrer walked over to his side. He wasn't one of the crew leaders, but Black Nail had invited him along to get his input on the construction, since he was the closest thing the tribe had to an expert on building stuff. He was almost as good at building as he was at destroying. That's a lot of wood, boss, Farrer remarked as he watched another tree fall. I could use these logs for charcoal. All my furnaces are going to need to burn a lot of fuel. Take what you need, Black Nail replied as he supervised the workers. We can use the rest to build log cabins. The new axes will make it easy to chop the logs. I helped make cabins for Harad, and they were very warm during the winter. The work crews didn't manage to accomplish all that much during the first day, but that was fine with Black Nail. They were still experimenting and learning how to do the job. The next day, Black Nail led them all out into the green again, and their productivity increased noticeably. While they were working, they got some visitors from shelter. 3 older male villagers Black Nail hadn't talked to before came to see the work and give advice. If you plan on building a road that a wagon can roll across and one that won't wash away in the spring, you are going to have to put some foundations in place to hold the dirt in place, one of them pointed out. Also, you might want to think about how you are going to bridge the creeks and gullies in your way. Can't we just use some of these logs? Black Nail asked. Those will be fine as temporary fixes, but green wood will rot quickly and constantly need replaced. I don't suppose you have mortar, the villager replied. Black Nail didn't know what that was, but Farrer apparently did. I've been using clay to stick bricks together, the hobgoblin answered. That might work, but lime would be better. Do you have that? As Black Nail listened, the pair began talking about how to create lime mortar by putting limestone into a kiln and firing it. Black Nail was quite amazed that Farrer had somehow managed to find another reason to build some new kilns to burn a completely new material in. It seemed like half of human civilization was finding the right way to set things on fire. Maybe Farrer's fire-centric worldview was less crazy than Black Nail had thought, if only a little. All in all, it looks like you've got what you need to build yourself a road, though, the human villager told Black Nail. The idea of a road to Hurst Crest has quite a few people in town excited, even if they understand the place isn't what it used to be. We've been cooped up inside shelter for too long. Still water goes bad, and a lot of folk feel like we've been under constant siege these last few years. It might take a while to build that road, Black Nail replied. The man just nodded sagely. We've been cut off for over a decade. We don't lack patience. After inspecting everything, the villagers went back home. Under his careful supervision, Black Nail's minions continued working until it began to get dark, and then they headed back home for supper. All the hobgoblins and goblins were tired and hungry after working so hard, but none of them complained, since that would have just got them smacked. The following days passed in a similar manner. Slowly but surely, the work crews cut their way through the forest. Tree after tree fell to hobgoblin axes, until at last, they reached their destination. After 2 weeks, Black Nail's minions arrived at the fields outside shelter. There was a crash as they cut down the very last tree in their way. A small crowd of people from shelter were watching, and they immediately began clapping once the tree had fallen. Black Nail waved at them, before yelling at some hobgoblins to get back to work. It was important to keep up good relations with the humans, even if they were doing silly human things that seemed like a stupid waste of time. Anyway, there was still a lot of work that needed to be done before the road was truly finished. They may have cleared the last tree, but the path wasn't fit for a wagon. The muddy ground needed to be flattened and hardened, bridges needed built over creeks, and weak spots needed to be drained and reinforced. However, Black Nail didn't need all his work crews for that. Most of goblins could be let go now, and getting to shelter was now noticeably faster and safer. No more stumbling into unseen mimics or bears. After the last tree had been dragged aside and work had begun on digging up its stump, Black Nail paid closer attention to the gathered humans and listened in on what they were saying. Never thought I'd see the like, goblin roads, one man remarked with a judgmental huff. The woman in a homespun dress beside him nodded in agreement. Things are changing, that's for sure. Probably for the better, I think. The gods know there are few ways they could get worse. Maybe, but I sure wish I knew what was going to happen next. This is a strange wind that is blowing over us and who knows what rides upon it, an frail-looking older man with a bald head replied as he stroked his long white beard. Black Nail huffed indignantly in response and turned away. Of course, things were changing. He was here now. How could they not change when the greatest leader ever born was here? He made everything better by his mere presence. Tannen came over to talk for a few minutes about Black Nail's schedule. After they were done chatting, the village headman led the other humans back to the village. Black Nail let his minions rest for a few minutes before taking them back to the goblin settlement. Just as the walls of their home came into sight through the trees, they passed by a group of Farrer's minions who were working around a cluster of newly constructed charcoal mounds. The smoking piles of earth had been built to burn the trees felled by the work crews. Even from this far back, Black Nail could see the thick trails of smoke that were now constantly streaming up into the air over the settlement. Farrer's many ovens, kilns, and furnaces were all constantly burning wood and charcoal to produce the endless stream of materials Black Nail's plans required, and because Farrer just liked burning things. When the work crews reached the settlement's gate, Black Nail disbanded his minions. Instantly, the ranks of goblins and hobgoblins dissolved into chaos as they all fled in every direction as quickly as their feet could carry them. They didn't want to stay anywhere near Black Nail, in case he changed his mind or found something else for them to do. Black Nail just grinned in amusement as he watched them flee. Their efforts were futile. There was nowhere they could hide from him. It didn't take long for Gob to show up. He walked up to Black Nail's side and gave his chieftain a quick respectful salute. How are the preparations for tonight going? Black Nail asked him. Everything shall be as you wish, your amazingness. There have been no problems with your incredible plan. I made sure of it, personally, Gob replied. Black Nail stretched out his arms and yawned. Good, I'm going to take a nap until the feast is ready. Make sure all the hobgoblins are there when I show up. I don't plan on doing this twice. Gob gave him another salute in acknowledgement, and Black Nail headed over to his cave to waste some time until supper. It was so nice to finally have some halfway competent minions he could delegate things to. Some time later, the low rumble of drums awakened Black Nail from his slumber. He grumbled to himself, but climbed to his feet and walked outside of his cave. It sounded like the feast was starting and he didn't want to miss it. It was important that he give his speech. Tonight, he was going to be making some important changes. Just thinking about it made Black Nail excited and he grinned in anticipation. The sluggishness of sleep sloughed away as the sound of drums grew louder in his ears. It pulsed in tune with his beating heart. All the noise was coming from the center of camp. It was just starting to get dark, so Blacknail could make out the light of several fires up ahead. The soft glow cast flickering shadows on the walls of the buildings around Blacknail as he walked closer to the light, and the succulent smell of cooking meat grew stronger. Without a doubt, the combination of sound and smell was drawing every hobgoblin and goblin to the training field. They wouldn't be able to resist. Walking out from among the longhouses, Blacknail stepped out onto the training ground. As expected, it was full of hobgoblins and goblins. They loitered around and watched the bonfires, where Gob and a small formation of hobgoblins with swords and spears were overseeing the cooks and drummers as they worked. The drums were primitive things, but they made more than enough noise and they were fun to use. The instruments were made from a tanned animal skin that was stretched over a hollow cylinder of wood and tied in place using sinew. To play it, a goblin or hobgoblin simply slapped the top repeatedly. Blacknail wasn't sure where the design had come from. One of the hobgoblins had just started making them, and since they weren't completely useless, he'd allowed them to continue. Walking through the crowd, Blacknail approached Gob. Is everyone here? Yes, I sent some hobs to look all throughout the settlement, and they didn't find anyone. Besides, who would want to or dare to miss a speech from our great chieftain? Gob hurriedly answered as Blacknail nodded and turned away. Under the darkening sky, Blacknail studied the ranks of his hungry minions as the firelight played across their angled faces and sharp inhuman features. Most of them were grinning from excitement or hunger, revealing a sea of sharp pointy teeth, and their beady eyes were almost all looking his way now. Yes, he definitely had their attention. It was time. Grinning confidently to himself, Blacknail stepped up onto a wooden platform several goblins hurriedly brought over and cleared his throat. I am Blacknail, the mighty chieftain of this mighty tribe. Before I gift you all with lots of delicious hot food, listen to my wise words. All the gathered hobgoblins grew silent, and the rhythm of the drummers behind Blacknail grew quieter and more subdued. Some of you may be wondering why you are here and why you listen to me. Let me tell you why you obey, Blacknail told the gathered goblinoids with steely confidence. There are those among you that do not know what it is like to be a feral hobgoblin. Because of me, many of you have grown up without knowing that savage life. Ferals have no clothes or tasty meals. They have no allies and no shelter. If you were a feral you could not sleep without fear of harpies' claws and trolls' jaws. Without the restraint I have beaten into you all, you would turn against each other and become ferals. You would need to flee before the steel and skill of humans. They would surround you and cut you down, no matter how sly and tricky you are. Amidst the sound of the drums, there was a crack as a branch in the fire snapped in two, and a shower of sparks shot up into the air next to Blacknail as he continued speaking. I have changed all that. I tamed the rage that would destroy you. Now, we cut down the green itself to make our homes and trample the ground beneath our feet. Our power rises every day. Under me, you have more than you could ever dream of, and this is just the beginning. When you eat the feast I offer to you, remember that it is yours because you obey me and contribute to the tribe. Loyalty and skill are rewarded here. Several hobgoblins shouted in agreement, but Blacknail silenced them with a wave of his hand. We are more than just some goblins and hobgoblins gathered together, and we are more than a mere feral tribe that has grown larger than normal. There has never been anything like us before. The world shudders as we take our place upon it. The sound of our drums echo unchallenged through the green. Thus, I now give us a true name. We are the Blackmark clan and this fortress that we have made our own is Iron Break. As Blacknail's voice fell silent, his gathered minions began whispering and talking among themselves. A heady blend of emotions could be heard in their voices. Fear, excitement, and surprise were all mixed together. Blacknail gave them a second before continuing. However, tonight, I offer you more than names. I offer a new reward to the skilled and loyal among you, a mark to show everyone your abilities. To show the world what you have made of yourself. Blacknail gestured and one of the hobgoblins standing beside Gob stepped up onto the platform next to Blacknail. In the light of the bonfires, it was easy to see that there was something different about him. He had a tattoo under his left eye. It had taken quite a bit of experimentation to get the tattooing process down, but the third group of goblin test subjects had all survived, so Beardy and Blacknail had moved on to discussing design and placement. Blacknail had wanted it to be somewhere in plain sight, so he'd decided to put the tattoos on hobgoblins' faces. The entire point of the tattoo was to be a constant and unescapable reminder of membership in the tribe. The design they had settled on was a simple series of black lines around the eye. This hobgoblin was a warrior and that was what his tattoo indicated. The black dye stood out from the green skin and it was easy to make from certain smashed rocks. From now on, all hobgoblins will be given a mark after their transformation to signify their membership in the tribe, and after they have completed their trial of initiation, they can ask to be tested for further marks, Blacknail explained before pointing at the hobgoblin beside him. This hob has the warrior mark. He was tested by the tribe's leaders and found to have enough skill and courage to be one of our best fighters. When he was done describing all the benefits of getting a mark, including not having to do menial work, Blacknail explained that the warrior test wasn't the only one a hobgoblin could take. There was also a crafting mark for skilled workers and one for mages, although neither had been designed yet. Farrer and Imp would be in charge of testing for them. The gathered goblins and hobgoblins reacted with excitement to the news, although they swiftly began to grow bored and hungry as Blacknail kept talking. Noticing this, the hobgoblin chieftain quickly wrapped up his speech and announced the start of the feast. Instantly, the mob of goblins rushed forward and began to fight over the best pieces of food. Blacknail smiled as he watched them from atop his platform. As they ate, the hobgoblins talked amongst themselves. They seemed excited about getting their own tattoos. Black Nail chuckled as he listened in. The Black Mark tribe had been born, and soon the entire world would know that name, along with his own, and they would tremble in fear. Will of Iron 6. The gathered horde of hobgoblins and goblins continued to feast until the last bit of food was gone. Too stuffed to move, most of them sat around the bonfires and relaxed. The scratchy sound of goblin conversation could be heard over the low sound of the drums, and a few hobgoblins even began singing. Acting swiftly, Black Nail used a club and excessive levels of violence to stomp it out before it started. He didn't want to listen to that. Hobgoblin throats were not made for singing. Once everyone had been given some time to digest their meals, Black Nail announced the next event. The night wasn't over yet. Not even close. Now, Black Nail would be publicly testing the first few hobgoblins that wanted warrior marks. As everyone watched, an area next to the bonfires was quickly cleared of goblins and a circle was drawn in the dirt around it. When the ring was complete, Black Nail and one of Gob's minions entered the circle. Both of them wore leather armor and were holding blunt short swords. Black Nail was planning on putting on a show, so that everyone was reminded about how awesome he was. The test itself was simple. The applicant would duel the examiner and try impress him with his sword skills. Once the duel was over, the examiner would decide if he passed or failed. Harming the examiner was forbidden, but Black Nail had taken a swig of elixir just in case. You couldn't be too careful around hobgoblins, and it was more than possible for them to be dangerous because of stupidity or incompetence rather than malice. Raising his blade, Black Nail smiled at his opponent. The hobgoblin seemed nervous and unsure of himself, so Black Nail took the initiative and attacked first. He opened with a few easy and controlled swings that forced the hobgoblin to concentrate and dodge. After several of his blows were blocked, Black Nail increased the speed and power of his attacks. However, the hobgoblin was able to block or dodge them all using the basic sword techniques he'd been taught. To pass you need to attack me, Black Nail said as he advanced. The hobgoblin grimaced but moved forward to meet Black Nail, and after dodging his chieftain's next attack, he slashed at Black Nail's arm. Black Nail easily stepped out of the way of the attack and countered by extending a leg and tripping his off-balance minion. The surprised hobgoblin stumbled and Black Nail easily tapped his back with the tip of his blade. You need to do better. Try again, Black Nail laughed as his embarrassed opponent nodded and steadied himself. They sparred for a few more minutes without the hobgoblin getting a blow on Black Nail. That was to be expected, though. Black Nail had trained for much longer than any of his minions, was a vessel, and was also a total genius at everything. Still, this hobgoblin had shown a solid understanding of the basics, so Black Nail ended the fight and awarded him with a pass. Smiling in relief, the hobgoblin initiate bowed to Black Nail and then stepped out of the ring. The nearby hobgoblins shouted encouragement as he passed. Watching the fight had gotten everyone excited. After a quick break, the next hobgoblin looking to be tested entered the circle and began to spar with Black Nail. This fight and the next both went very similar to the first. The hobgoblins passed, but they weren't able to hit Black Nail or even challenge him all that much. The fourth hobgoblin to enter the circle was quite tall. Much to Black Nail's annoyance, he was even slightly taller than him. Ignoring his height, his head was decorated by two curved horns and short brown hair. He also didn't seem as nervous as the others had been. Instead, he was actually smiling in excitement. Weird. Looking him over, Black Nail decided that he wasn't going to go quite so easy on this applicant. A few smacks would probably do him good. As soon as his opponent had taken up a guard position, Black Nail rapidly glided forward to attack. He unleashed a swift slash at the hobgoblin's head meant to force him to block, so Black Nail could push him off balance with the next move. However, much to Black Nail's surprise, the tall hobgoblin didn't try to block. Rather, he managed to lean out of the way of the attack and counter at the same time. The hobgoblin's blade sliced toward Black Nail's side and he was forced to jump back. Scowling, Black Nail brought his guard back up and reassessed the skill of his opponent. Clearly, this hobgoblin was better than the ones before. Aggressively but not without caution, the tall hobgoblin stepped forward to keep the pressure on. Black Nail didn't give ground, so they quickly exchanged a series of blows and slashes, with neither of them gaining the advantage. Black Nail stopped holding back. Without burning elixir, he used all his speed and power. When his opponent failed to buckle under the pressure of his blows, he then began to use every dirty trick he knew. Although a few techniques caught the tall hobgoblin by surprise, he swiftly adjusted and managed to avoid being hit. The fighters danced around the circle as they relentlessly hacked and slashed at each other. Their blades sliced through the air and met with violent clangs that caused the myriad watchers to flinch. The rowdy mob of watchers that encircled the ring began to grow quiet as everyone became entranced by the fight and the dance of flashing blades. However, Black Nail eventually began to tire, since this was his fourth match. How could this hobgoblin possibly be so good at sword fighting? Where had he learned to fight like this? It didn't make any sense. Black Nail grimaced as he deflected a stab toward his gut. As the leader, there was no way he was going to back down. He still had a trick or two left anyway. Scowling in determination, Black Nail pressed the attack. He launched a series of quick feints and slashes at the space around his opponent's head. The hobgoblin dodged the first few strikes but was eventually forced to take a step back. That was what Black Nail had been aiming for. Instantly, he swung his blade around and slashed at the hobgoblin's trailing front leg. His sword sliced through the air but missed its target by less than an inch as the hobgoblin pivoted on his back leg. At the same time, his sword came back around and struck toward Black Nail's shoulder. Cold surprise shot up Black Nail's spine as his eyes locked on the incoming blade. For a timeless moment, the sword seemed impossible to stop and Black Nail stood frozen. Then, elixir burned away Black Nail's doubt as he tapped into its power, and he burst into motion. With new speed, he leaned away from the blow as he raised his weapon, and then he struck. His blade leapt toward his opponent's side and hit him squarely in the ribs. At the last moment, Black Nail pulled the blow and twisted his sword so that he hit with the flat of the blade, but it still struck with enough force to send the hobgoblin stumbling backward, and there was a loud thud from the impact. Grinning in satisfaction, even though he'd maybe, sort of cheated a little tiny bit, Black Nail let his blade drop. He'd won, and that was the important thing. Of course, it hadn't really been a competition. Well, whatever. He'd won. As a cheer broke out and the watching mob began screaming Black Nail's name, the fallen hobgoblin groaned and stiffly climbed to his feet. He kept his blade arm low and clutched his injured side, so it didn't look like he wanted to keep on fighting. That was fine with Black Nail. So, did I pass, boss? The tall hobgoblin shouted so that he could be heard over all the shouting. Oh, right. This was a test. Black Nail nodded. Yay, good job. Where did you learn to fight like that? You're much better than everyone else but me. It's a little weird. The hobgoblin shrugged, and then winced as the action caused him pain. Lots of people taught me. I've been learning from every human and hobgoblin that would teach me, and fighting all the people who wouldn't. The red-headed human female has been very useful. I doubt that, but good job. Your swordsmanship is impressive, Black Nail replied. He was one of the few hobgoblins Black Nail had ever met who would probably be able to defeat a human in a fair duel. Was he some sort of genius or something? The hobgoblin bowed his head in thanks. The shining sword is all. The way of the blade is the knowledge you gave us. It had allowed me to be better than my rage. It has transformed me. Now, I am the blade itself. I have given it my everything and it has given me my everything in return. Neat, Black Nail replied with a tight smile. Ah, so he had another one of these. At least it was a very straightforward and useful obsession. Most the others were much more roundabout when it came to using them for murder. Although, the tricky part was going to be not getting murdered himself. I don't know your name. Do you have one? Black Nail asked. The hobgoblin nodded. They call me. Black Nail cut him off with a wave of his hand. I shall call you Slashy. That's your name now, and it's a great one, so you should thank me. The hobgoblin now known as Slashy looked unsure and hesitated a moment for replying. Thank you. No problem. I'm awesome at naming things. Black Nail replied as he gave Slashy a friendly pat on the shoulder. Unsteady on his feet, Slashy then departed the ring and the last challenger entered. Black Nail scowled as he realized who it was. What was Hera doing here? Had she always been part of the event? Black Nail had no idea if she was any good with a blade. Wait. Was that Kida standing over by where Hera had come from? Seriously, why was she here? The stupid redhead had definitely not been invited. No humans had been. What are you doing here? Black Nail asked Hera as she walked over with blade in hand. She gave him a curious look. I'm here for the test. I want a warrior mark. Alright fine, but Gob didn't mention that you were one of the candidates. I would have probably remembered that. Hera shrugged. Yes, one of initiates he suggested was injured in an unfortunate accident, so I volunteered to replace him. What exactly happened to this unlucky hob? Black Nail asked. He was suspicious. Something hard hit the back of his head and knocked him unconscious, Hera answered deadpan. I see, Black Nail replied carefully. Well, let's get the test started. He wasn't sure what Hera was up to, but Kida was undoubtedly involved in it up to her scrawny pink neck. Why else would she be here? Hera nodded in acknowledgement and raised her blade as she took a stance, so Black Nail did likewise. A moment later, he began the spar with a high slash meant to draw her out. She hesitated but didn't take the bait, so Black Nail pressed the attack. The sparring match continued for several minutes after that. Hera seemed to be at the same level as the first two hobgoblins or maybe slightly higher. Black Nail quickly began to get tired, so he wrapped the fight up fairly quickly. After tapping Hera's shoulder he stepped back away from her. Fine, you pass. You can have the warrior mark, Black Nail told her as he took a few deep breaths to fill his lungs and speed his recovery. A happy grin appeared on Hera's face. Oh, thank you, great chief. You are as wise as you are handsome. I know, Black Nail replied as he turned away from her. There was a loud chorus of cheers from the watchers around the ring as they realized the fight was over, and Black Nail went to find somewhere to sit down. His arms were stiff, and he was breathing heavier than normal after all the sparring. Hera happily trailed after him. When he turned to look at her, she gave him a friendly grin. Would you like some food, boss? I can grab some for you. Why would you? Black Nail asked suspiciously. You're the chief and I'm your minion. I live to serve you, and besides, you worked so hard to set up the test. Black Nail considered her words for a moment. Alright, fine. I do feel like having some more meat. Right away, boss. Hera replied. She winked and then turned to run off back the way she'd come. Feeling a little confused, Black Nail went to find a place to sit. There was a nice wooden bench sitting just the right distance from one of the bonfires. The only problem was that it was occupied by 3 hobgoblins, but that was easy enough to fix. Yawning, Black Nail simply walked over and shoved them off the bench from behind. Once the startled hobgoblins saw who it was that had pushed them, they swiftly vacated the premise without a word. Black Nail nodded in satisfaction as he sat down on the bench. It was nice to be respected properly. After Black Nail had been sitting down and enjoying the waves of heat coming off the fire for a few minutes, Hera returned with a plate of meat. Black Nail wasn't sure where she'd gotten it since almost everything had already been eaten. She must have had it squirreled away somewhere. Here you go, best boss, she said as she handed it to him. Thank you, Black Nail replied as he took the plate. He had to push himself up since he was lying on his side. Hera quickly sat down beside him and gave him another grin. Do you want me to feed you? You seem very tired. All right, Black Nail replied after thinking it over. Her idea would prevent him from having to get up, and it was unlikely that she was trying to poison him. He was fairly sure he hadn't done anything to enrage her lately. In fact, she had been unusually quiet these past few days. Without delay, Hera began cutting up the meat and using a fork to bring the meat up to Black Nail's mouth where he could eat it. She smiled down at him as Black Nail ate, and Black Nail got a whiff of her scent. It smelled like she'd been rolling in flowers or something. Weird. By the time the plate was empty, Black Nail was feeling very full. His belly stuck out and felt heavy. He had already eaten earlier after all. Looking around, Black Nail saw that the field around the bonfires was emptier now and the sky overhead had become pitch black and peppered with stars. It had grown late and many of the goblins and hobgoblins had wandered off back to their homes. Since Black Nail had already eaten as much as he possibly could, it was probably time for him to do the same and head home for the night. Groaning, Black Nail began to get up. Where are you going? Hera asked with a pout. She seemed to have been enjoying herself, although Black Nail had no idea why. I'm going to sleep now. See you tomorrow, Black Nail answered as he began to walk away from the bonfires and out into the darkness. Instead of staying behind, Hera quickly followed after him. I'll walk with you. Black Nail waved her away. No, stay here. As Hera stopped and pouted again, Kida suddenly emerged from out of nowhere and walked over. She can come with me. I'm going to the cave as well. Black Nail stopped in his tracks and turned to scowl at her. Kida had a bed in his cave because back when he'd first claimed the place it had been one of the only safe places she could have slept, but she had rarely used it lately. Still, it was obviously too dark for her to go back to shelter now, and she had to sleep somewhere. Why are you even here? He asked her. I never miss a party or a fight, and this was both. Where else would I be? The redhead replied with a smug smile. Fine, whatever. Neither of you better ruin my sleep, though, Black Nail replied as he began walking again. For some reason this made Kida laugh as she joined up with Hera. Together, the pair strolled after Black Nail and whispered quietly back and forth. Black Nail's ears twitched as he tried to listen in, but he couldn't quite make out what they were saying. Black Nail huffed in annoyance. It was probably stupid nonsense anyway. When Black Nail got to his cave and walked inside, Kida and Hera both followed him. Narrowing his eyes in suspicion, Black Nail sat down on his bed and stared at them. It was obvious that they were up to something. The pair were obviously co-conspirators in some sort of scheme, although Black Nail wasn't sure what the goal of it was. As Black Nail watched, the pair whispered to each for a few moments, and then Kida suddenly spoke up. Sure, you stay here. I'll go grab the comb. I want to show it to you anyway. The redhead then turned and gave Black Nail a quick mischievous grin before running out of the cave. Suspicious. Black Nail's brow wrinkled as he watched her go. What was she playing at? He hoped it wasn't going to interfere with his sleep. He didn't have the time or patience to deal with all this nonsense right now. As Black Nail focused on Kida leaving, Hera tentatively walked his way. Black Nail frowned and turned to look at her, and she gave him a nervous smile. There's something I want to show you, Hera announced. What is it? Black Nail asked. That was when Hera pulled off her shirt and untied her belt. Both her shirt and her pants hit the floor at the same time, revealing her naked body. Black Nail stared, too surprised to think. My breasts have gotten bigger, haven't they? Hera asked as she put her hands on her hips. Slowly, Black Nail brain began to work again. He'd figured out what was going on now. It was an ambush. The problem was he wasn't sure he even wanted to avoid the trap. Do you like what you see? Hera asked him as she stepped closer and wiggled her hips. Even in his current state of mind, Black Nail knew there was only one answer to that question. Yes, you're nice to look at, Black Nail found himself saying. It was true. Hera's chest had filled in a little, even if it was still nothing compared to that of certain humans, including one that Black Nail wasn't even going to think about right now. Bad idea. Black Nail hesitated as Hera leaned in closer, and he smelled the flower scent again. It wasn't particularly strong, but it did smell refreshing. Stop. He had to focus, and not on Hera's enticing green body. Something else. Was it safe to mate with Hera? Black Nail had been sure that he'd had good reasons not to, but he couldn't remember what those were right now. Most importantly, it seemed unlikely that this was a plot to assassinate him. Hera was loyal, and would gain nothing from killing him since everyone would know it was her. Unless someone else was behind the plot, but who? Suddenly, Hera's lips met his own, and Black Nail's brain shut off again. Burning need blazed up from below his core and sent his heart into overdrive. He growled softly as the feeling consumed him, and he reached over to pull Hera's thin body closer. Will of Iron 7. The image of a dashingly handsome hobgoblin with a perfectly pointy nose looked back at Black Nail as he stared into the puddle of water. Wow, he was good looking. Grinning at his own magnificence, Black Nail raised a hand and rubbed the top of his forehead where his horns were growing. It had been a while since he'd last trimmed them, and now they were as long as one of his fingers. That was longer than they'd ever been. Having horns was awkward. Black Nail was still getting used to their weight, and they kept getting heavier as they grew. They also made it much harder to wear hats and hoods, and it was basically impossible for him to disguise himself as a human anymore. That was fine, though. The time for hiding his identity was over. Now was the moment for seizing power, and among goblins longhorns were a symbol of authority. Black Nail nodded in approval at his reflection. His horns definitely had a nice white color that contrasted nicely with his green skin. Black Nail couldn't wait until they got longer. He hoped his would keep growing until they were as impressive as the antlers of the hobgoblin chief he'd killed. Those had been very striking. It wasn't like he really cared, but he wondered if Hera would find that attractive. What about humans? Bah, whatever, Black Nail grumbled as he stood up and began walking back to the road. At this point he doubted he could keep Hera away with a long pointy stick, no matter what his horns looked like. Black Nail had just finished going for a quick early morning walk out in the bush. He enjoyed his privacy, which was hard to find in Iron Break these days. The settlement was buzzing of activity, and Black Nail's minions were always looking to get his approval or advice for something that should have been obvious. It never stopped. Several weeks had passed since the first warrior initiation ceremony had been held. Except for a few difficult areas, the road to shelter was complete. Most of the work crews were now working on the road to Hurst Crest, but Black Nail had also sent some of them south to scout and map the old roads that led back to civilization. The workers cutting their way to Hurst Crest were actually making good time. Unsurprisingly, it was much easier to repair an old road than create an entirely new one. Most of their work was just clearing brush and younger trees, and in some places that already done that for them by the fire Black Nail had set. Black Nail wandered out of the bushes and jumped up onto the road. Broken vegetation and torn earth still surrounded it, clear signs of all the effort that had gone into cutting a path through the forest. Here and there, a few fallen logs were still laying next to the road. Many of the logs had been dragged back to Iron Break, but there was still plenty left that had yet to be moved. As Black Nail approached the settlement, he saw dozens of logs piled up outside the walls. Further out, the crops that the goblins had planted were beginning to grow. The small fields looked haphazard and chaotic, but most of the plants were healthy. Under the watchful eyes of overseers, teams of goblins kept the fields free of weeds and bugs. 2 weeks ago, Black Nail had sent a bunch of his minions over toward Hurst Crest. Some of them were replacements for Scamp's group at the goblin camp, and others were to help Illisti hunt for food. Avorlus had also gone with them. He'd been determined to study the crystal cave there, and Black Nail had decided to let him. He wasn't sure it was safe, but he'd already gotten the information he needed from the mage, so that wasn't really his problem. The morning air was wet and chilly, so as he fought off a shiver, Black Nail headed to Farrer's workshop. There was always at least one warm fire burning there, and he found their work interesting as well. He usually had no idea what they were trying to do, but watching them run around playing with fire was amusing. Farrer's workshop hadn't stopped growing. It now contained a large storehouse and a small smithy. There was a hobgoblin working at the smithy as Black Nail approached. Using a large hammer, the hobgoblin was pounding a small piece of heated wrought iron into the shape of an arrowhead. He was using a pair of tongs to hold the metal in place on top of a small anvil as he worked. The anvil had been loaned to them by the smith from shelter. Black Nail walked over to the heat of a furnace, and watched sparks fly as metal crashed loudly against metal. This hobgoblin was one of Farrar's assistant, and he had the maker's mark on his face. It was largely the same as the warrior mark, but the lines around the eye were a bit different. The rhythmic clanging of the blacksmith's work kept Black Nail's attention as the warmth radiating from the smoking furnace next to him warmed his bones. Ah, that felt better. Farrar and his assistants were now capable of creating a bunch of simple tools out of wrought iron. Mostly, they made nails and arrowheads, but they were also trying their hand at spear tips and shovels. Black Nail's presence at the smithy didn't go unnoticed. Farrar emerged from one of the nearby buildings and quickly hurried over to his chief's side. "Have you found a swordsmith to kidnap yet?" Farrar immediately asked. There was a hopeful look on his face. "Still no," Black Nail told him. He was unamused. Farrar had been asking him the same question every day for the past week. Black Nail had made the mistake of asking Farrar if he could make swords. The answer had been a definite no, but the question had intrigued Farrar. Apparently, swords were much harder to make than arrowheads. Wrought iron was too soft, so they had to be made from steel, which Farrar couldn't make yet. Actually making a sword also required special blacksmithing techniques that Farrar, the expert from Hurst Crest, and the blacksmith from Shelter all didn't know. That was why he'd asked Black Nail to find and kidnap a human who did know how to make swords. "I haven't even left Iron Break. Where would I find a rare type of human like that?" Black Nail asked. He'd come to the conclusion that Farrar was spoiled rotten, and far too used to getting what he wanted. Farrar shrugged. Maybe he got lost in the woods. "No, that's dumb. I'll tell you if I find a swordsmith." "Stop asking," Black Nail replied before huffing and walking away. Looking over to his left, Black Nail saw a construction site. The surplus of lumber and access to iron axes had allowed the hobgoblins to begin building log cabins. Some of the flimsier longhouses were already being torn down to make room for them. The log cabins would be much warmer in the winter, and the area inside the settlement's walls was starting to get crowded, so room had to be made for them. It had become impossible to count all the goblins that now lived inside Iron Break. The little runts had swarmed out of the green to get access to the plentiful food and shelter that Iron Break offered. More and more of them were also transforming into hobgoblins. It was a good thing that the green was so bountiful. If you could survive to harvest it, the forest was full of food, and goblins would eat almost anything anyway. The availability of timber and iron tools had also allowed Black Nail to begin construction on his mansion. Several workmen from Shelter were helping his minions create a proper house of his own using the best human construction techniques. It was far from done, but once complete it would be the biggest and fanciest home around. Black Nail couldn't wait to fill it with loot. As headed to Gob's longhouse, Black Nail passed by the training field. It was the only large empty area left inside the walls. The space was needed both for training, which several hobgoblins were using it for right now, and for the public tests. Black Nail had been holding new initiation ceremonies for warriors every few days. However, there was quite a backlog of hobgoblins with the skills to pass the test, so it was a good thing that Gob and a few of his more skilled helpers could act as test administrators. Really, it was the tattoos that were slowing everything down. The art of tattooing was simple in theory. Dye was pushed under the skin using needles. However, in practice it was quite difficult. Beardy had done the first few tattoos and tried to teach others, but only one hobgoblin had really picked the skill up. Black Nail was just glad that the warrior mark design was easy to make and didn't have to be exact. After Black Nail reached his destination, he yelled out Gob's name, and the hobgoblin immediately stepped out of his longhouse and gave his boss a salute. "Command me, mightiest of chiefs. Is the expedition force ready?" Black Nail replied. "Yes, boss. They're at the gate. I picked out only the best scouts and warriors for your escorts and made sure they had the best food packed for the journey. The runner I sent also said that the humans from Shelter will be waiting for you. Everything is ready." "Good job," Black Nail replied with a nod of approval. Black Nail had grown tired of sitting around Iron Break and doing nothing. It was time to push his plan forward, and to do that he needed to make a move south. That was why he'd sent scouts out to map the best route. There was an old road that had used to connect Shelter to the rest of the human lands, but it had been consumed by the Green years ago. Still, it was the easiest way south. The original path Black Nail and the others had used to get to Shelter had been far less than straight and involved passing over a lot of rough terrain that the old road would avoid. After listening to Gob praise him for several more minutes, Black Nail dismissed his subordinate and went back to his cave to grab his gear. Once had his backpack, he headed over to Iron Break's main gate. There, just as Gob had promised, Black Nail found the force he'd requested waiting for him. 24 hobgoblins were surrounded by twice that many goblins, and behind them were 2 hogs that had been loaded up with supplies. Half of the hobgoblins bore the warrior mark and had proper swords. The others carried iron-tipped spears and daggers. Black Nail grunted when he saw Hera among them. He wasn't surprised by her presence. The female hobgoblin had been bothering him even more now that he'd mated with her, and she was rarely far away. Oh, well. At least he was getting plenty of sex. That was nice. All right, let's get going, Black Nail yelled as he motioned for everyone to head through the gate. His minions jumped to obey his command, and soon they were all marching down the newly constructed road that led to Shelter. They made much faster progress than they could have if they'd been forced to hike through the woods, and Black Nail set a brisk pace, so they promptly reached their destination. Lounging outside of Shelter's walls were a bunch of familiar faces. Black Nail saw Geralt, Beardy, and at the back, Kida. There were also half a dozen other old members of Herad's band and one young man from Shelter. "Ah, good. You're here, Hobgoblin. We can finally get going," Beardy remarked as Black Nail approached. Geralt was politer. "It's wonderful to see you, Black Nail. Are you feeling up to an adventure?" "Myself, I can't wait to get going. Shelter has become a sort of home, but it's missing quite a few luxuries, I'm afraid. I really need to go shopping." Black Nail gave them both a quick nod. "Yes, I'm ready. Let's move." Several of the hobgoblins that Black Nail had sent south to scout the way were with him now, so they were able to lead everyone through the forest and over to the old road without a problem. The overgrown road was in similar shape to the one Black Nail had taken to Hurst Crest. It had obviously been a while since it had seen regular use. Grass and thick clumps of bushes had grown up through what had once been hard-packed earth. The trees had also pressed in on both sides and debris like fallen branches and logs littered its surface. However, it did supply Black Nail's group with firm level ground to travel on. Yes. This is much easier than the route we took the first time. Less swamp and cliffs, Geralt had remarked after they had been hiking for about an hour. There were murmurs of agreement from most the other humans and Black Nail nodded along. Despite Geralt's earlier excitement, the rest of the day was uneventful, and after walking until it began to get dark, they had to come to stop and set up camp for the night. Before everyone went to sleep, a scowling and exasperated Kida visited Black Nail. She had apparently been selected by the other humans to tell him and Hera to stop mating so loudly. That was fine with Black Nail. Hera was rather exhausting. It wasn't until 2 more days of hard travel had passed that they escaped the untamed Green. The stretch of ruined and overrun road they were following led up a hill and then down to another road. This new road was in much better repair and obviously saw plenty of use. They had reached the border of civilization. "At last, we're here," Geralt had exclaimed happily as he looked down at the road. "But where exactly is here?" Black Nail asked Beardy. This was why he'd brought him along. "We'll have to do some exploring to find out. I'm not familiar with every nook and cranny in the north, but we should be somewhere northeast of Herad's old camp," the man replied gruffly. Geralt nodded. "There are a few walled towns left in this area, and probably some travelers nearby, so we should be able to find someone who knows the lay of the land." That sounded fine to Black Nail. "Go then, and make sure you find out everything you can about Warwick. I will stay here with my minions and wait for 2 days." Geralt grinned in excitement, but Beardy gave Black Nail a thoughtful look. And what are you up to? You didn't bring us here just for information and shopping, did you? Getting supplies is important, but you're right. I want to keep a watch on this area, just in case, Black Nail replied with a shrug. We should keep our eyes open. Warwick might try something. He knows we're out in the green and he doesn't like us much. Beardy accepted that argument reluctantly, and then he led the other humans down the road. Kida waved goodbye to Black Nail as they walked out of sight. What now, boss? One of Black Nail's minions asked. We scout, Black Nail replied. He wanted the entire area explored and everything of interest found before humans got back. At his orders, the hobgoblins split into 2 even groups and went in separate directions. They were to avoid contact with strangers and stay out of sight. He didn't want any of his minions getting into trouble and creating a mess he had to clean up. Black Nail led the group going in the opposite direction of the humans, and they took the pack beasts, because he was the leader. They walked for over an hour without seeing anything but a lot of trees and rocks, until some noise from up ahead alerted them that someone was coming their way. Black Nail quickly commanded his minions to hide in the forest at the edge of the road, and then followed them. Hiding behind a bush, Black Nail watched the road and waited for the source of the noise to appear. It didn't take long. 3 minutes later, a small merchant caravan came into sight. It was comprised of 2 covered wagons being pulled by horses. Around the wagons, quite a few humans were walking or riding. The clothes the people were wearing were bright and colorful, which was common among humans that constantly traveled. Briefly, Black Nail considered ordering an attack so they could steal all their stuff, but quickly decided against it. Now wasn't the time for that, and he doubted they had anything he really wanted. No, he had different plans in mind for the merchants using this road. Soon. When the caravan was safely gone, Black Nail and his minions got back on the road and resumed their exploration of the area. As they marched, Black Nail kept an eye out for any signs of abandoned side roads and sent hobgoblins to examine animal trails. After about an hour, one of those scouts found what Black Nail was looking for, an abandoned village hidden away in the forest. It was a small cluster of 24 huts that the wild had long ago reclaimed. The north was dotted by hundreds of similar ruins caused by humanity's decline, but it would serve Black Nail's purpose just fine. The thatch roofs that had rotted away long ago could be replaced and most the walls were easily reparable. It wouldn't take all that long to clear out all the vegetation that had taken over the village and its fields, and the well in the center of the houses smelled like it would be fine after a thorough cleaning. Black Nail nodded in satisfaction as he walked around and looked over the ruins. Yes, this place would function excellently as a hidden forward base. We still have lots of time until we need to meet back up with the humans. Get cleaning this place up, you lazy runts, Black Nail ordered his minions. This was why he'd brought so many minions, and all the goblins. He planned on setting up another outpost like the one near Hurst Crest here. Experience had taught him that it wouldn't take long for the settlement to begin to grow and attract feral goblins. Depending on what the humans found out, Black Nail planned on moving south soon, and when he did, he wanted a fully functional base available to help him seize control of the nearby territory. That would certainly draw Warwick out, and then their game of prey and predator could begin in earnest. The wolf had no idea what lay waiting within the green. Will of Iron 8. Over the next 2 days, Black Nail took it easy until it was time of the reunion with Geralt and the other humans. He kept his minions busy, though. As he intermittently supervised and napped, a lot of work was completed on restoring the abandoned village Black Nail's minions had found. The well had been cleaned and cleared of debris. All the shrubs inside the village grounds had been cut back, and work had been started on fixing up the houses. Of course, they had focused on repairing a house for Black Nail first, he was the leader after all. When the time came for the meet-up, Black Nail led a dozen of his hobgoblins back out onto the road. He left the other hobgoblins and all the goblins behind to continue work on building his new forward base while he was gone. After a steady uneventful march, Black Nail and his minions reached the rendezvous point without any trouble. When they got there, they didn't see any sign of the humans, so they settled down to wait at edge of the forest. There, they could stay out of sight but see anyone approaching. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long. Less than half an hour later, Geralt and the others walked into sight. Stretching to work out some kinks, Black Nail walked out of the forest to greet them. I was a little afraid that you wouldn't be here, Geralt had said as he gave Black Nail a relieved smile. I'm not sure why. Events have simply been inconveniently chaotic lately, I suppose. Black Nail shrugged. I'm glad you managed to return without falling into any holes. If you had taken much longer I would have had to go looking for you. Kida also said hello, but Black Nail ignored her and went straight to business. While you were gone, what did you learn about this place and Warwick? It was Beardy that replied first. Well, we were right about where we thought we were. As for the wolf, we found a town and asked around, but they didn't know all that much about the man himself and what he's been up to, other than rumors. We only know what some of his men have been doing locally, but I can guess at his plans based on what I've heard, Geralt had added. It seems like now that there are no credible threats to his authority, Warwick has been turning the remaining chiefs against each other by backing one side and encouraging them to take out their rivals. He seems intent on whittling down the number of bandits in his territory. Which makes sense to me. There are far too many armed bandits around for anyone to control. They can't just stop robbing and pillaging, since they aren't good for much else. Beardy nodded. From what we heard, that's what happened around here recently. One of the local bands was wiped out after their closest rival got some reinforcements and encouragement from Warwick. Interesting, Black Nail mused aloud. The wolf was a cunning leader. His plan seemed like a great way to eliminate unwanted troublemakers and build loyalty among the scattered bandits around the north at minimal cost to himself. Suddenly, Black Nail perked up as an interesting thought occurred to him. Did any of those bandits survive? The ones from around here? Probably. Beardy remarked uncertainly. I heard that some managed to flee, but surviving out in the wilds is tough for men like that. I doubt most of them will manage to hang on much longer. Black Nail grinned smugly. Perhaps the wolf had made a mistake. His plan only worked flawlessly if there was no serious opposition to his rule left in the north. What are you thinking? Gerlot asked curiously. I think we should help out the poor people who have just found themselves in the same situation as we used to be. Right now, they are probably suffering all alone out in the cold. So sad, Black Nail told him before sighing emphatically. Human emotions were fun to mimic. Beardy rolled his eyes scornfully. And how are we supposed to find these poor suffering professional murderers? If you know the last place they were seen, my scouts will do the rest, Black Nail replied as he flashed a toothy grin. Geralt was a little skeptical about the value of trying to recruit some unknown bandits, but he wasn't completely against it. Beardy had long ago learned not to fight Black Nail about this sort of thing, so he simply shrugged and told him everything he wanted to know. Black Nail used that information to quickly come up with a plan. It seems that we will be staying here for a little longer, he told Geralt. The man just shrugged. That's fine with me, my friend. I've still got plenty of coin left unspent, and a rather deep thirst for good wine that I suspect will never be quenched. How about we go back to the town and meet you back here the day after tomorrow? That would be fine, Black Nail agreed. 2 days was probably plenty of time if he moved fast. However, it would help his mission if he had. I'll go with Black Nail, Kida suddenly said. Her unexpected interjection interrupted Black Nail's thoughts and seemed to surprise Hashial, the young man who'd been following her. I've already seen everything interesting that town has to offer, and I feel like more of a real adventure, Kida explained as she suddenly became the center of attention. Black Nail scowled at her. He wanted to tell her to go away, but he'd just been about to ask for some humans to help him communicate with any bandits he found, and to serve as proof that he didn't eat humans. Thus, he couldn't really turn her down and ask someone else to stay. Fine, you can come, Black Nail told her before sighing deeply. Soon after that, the humans turned around and headed back to the town they'd just come from. That left Black Nail alone with his minions, Kida, and the blonde kid that followed her everywhere. So, we're going to go round us up some new minions. Kida exclaimed happily. Black Nail sighed again. Yep, that's the plan, but we will be going to my secret base to get some more supplies and minions first. Sharp. A secret base. I can't wait to see it, Kida replied cheerfully as they began to walk. You're probably going to be disappointed, Black Nail told her. What exactly was she expecting? He was wrong. When Kida got to Black Nail's newest outpost, an impressed look appeared on her face as she looked around. What? She had come from a human settlement much more impressive than this place, even before it had become an empty decaying ruin. Wow, sharp, Kida remarked as she stared down into the well. Hashial nodded. It's sort of neat. Black Nail glowered at them both. Stop being silly. What's neat about this place? It's a wreck. Lots. I've never visited an abandoned village before, Hashial explained. The way it is all overgrown is spooky. Do you think all the people that used to live here were slaughtered by bandits or mutants? Kida asked speculatively. No, there are no bones, Black Nail told her coldly. And there is nothing special about this place. There are lots of abandoned human places everywhere. You're very messy. Kida shrugged. Hey, I guess we are. Where's my house? Black Nail gave her a blank look. Why would you have a house? So, I have somewhere to sleep. You can have any house you fix, Black Nail told he dismissively before going off to find a better use of his time. Talking to Kida was making him dumber. He could feel it. Thankfully, Black Nail had places to be and things to organize. After deciding to leave half a dozen hobgoblins behind, he mustered up the others and got them marching onto the road. He also brought along the hogs and the 2 humans. He had the last known location of the bandits he was looking for, so he could probably use that to track them down. First though, he had to get there. It was several hours away, even using the roads, so they would have to move quickly if they wanted to get back before their deadline. Black Nail pushed the pace, and his group eventually closed in on their destination. It was a small semi-permanent campsite built next to the road, and it had been trashed. All the buildings and barricades had been torn down and burnt out. Black Nail thoughtfully frowned as he studied the remains. It looked like the camp had housed around 50 or so humans. However, judging by all the rotting corpses everywhere, only far less than that could have possibly survived the attack. Spread out and find me any human trails that lead out into the green. I want survivors, he informed his minions, and they quickly jumped to obey. There is no chance of running into the raiders that did this, is there? Hashial asked as he looked back at the road nervously. It could happen, Black Nail replied neutrally. But, they left several days ago, and we can always retreat into the forest if they return. Besides, we would hear them coming and human bandits could never track us through the green. Instead of joining the conversation, Kida studied the nearby ruins with an uncharacteristically depressed expression on her face. That was odd. Violence and the destruction it left in its wake usually excited the young redhead. This isn't much different than what happened to us, she remarked morosely a moment later. At her words, Black Nail felt a twinge of loss, which quickly transformed into anger. Warwick. Not the same. We had a much larger base and fought much harder than these losers, Black Nail replied dismissively as he waited for his minions to report back. The bandits here were just prey for the wolf. If Mahedium hadn't betrayed us, Harad could have beaten him. Yay, maybe, Kida responded solemnly. For the next few minutes, they waited among the devastation. The silence was awkward, but no one felt like speaking up. Black Nail just glared at everything. Thankfully, one of his scouts soon returned with news. I found you a trail, boss. Several humans fled into the green, that way, the scout explained as he pointed toward the far side of the camp. Gather up the others, then. We're moving out, Black Nail replied as he began walking. He wanted to get out of this place as soon as possible. After giving the hobgoblins time to return and reorganize, the scout led Black Nail and the others over to an animal trail that led into the forest. They carefully followed the winding path through the trees. Black Nail led the way. As he walked, he spotted many signs of recent human activity. There were partial footprints in the dirt and broken branches along the way. However, he saw no signs of sentries or watchers. Eventually, the trail led them down a hill into a rocky stream. Leaning out from behind a tree, Black Nail sniffed the air and studied the forest for any sign of humans. He didn't detect anything recent, so he carefully began to creep down to the stream. Once there, he looked around for more signs, and found some footprints headed upstream. I don't get it. Why wouldn't the raiders who took out the camp follow these people? They left a trail even I can see, Hashial asked quietly once he'd walked over to Black Nail. Lots of people get chased into the green, but very few make it back out again, Kida replied as Black Nail nodded in agreement. Even for trained scouts, the forest could be deadly, and most humans were complete idiots. After following the stream for a while, the canopy overhead began to open up. Beams of sunlight pierced the leafy roof overhead and hit the ground around the stream, and clusters of tall bushes and young trees grew up toward the illumination. Black Nail immediately signaled for everyone to stop as he studied the greenery suspiciously. The scent of blood hung heavily in the air here. What is it? Kida whispered. A mimic. Our targets probably ran into it and then fled. We're going around, Black Nail explained. He thought one tree in particular was suspicious, but when it came to mimics, it was almost always impossible to sure unless you got dangerously close. Cautiously, Black Nail led the group around the edge of the sunlit area, and he soon found the human's trail. There were drops of blood on the ground now. At least one of them was wounded. It didn't take them long after that to find their quarry. The wounded humans hadn't gone far. After escaping the mimic, they holed up in a nearby cave. Black Nail studied it from distance. There was one human keeping watch at its entrance, but he didn't see anyone else. So, what do we do now, boss? One of the hobgoblin scouts asked. Black Nail smiled and turned to look at the two humans he'd brought. Now we introduce ourselves. One brief conversation later, Black Nail left his hobgoblins behind and began leading his two humans over to the cave. They moved slowly, but out in the open where they would be impossible to miss. Beside him, Kida was vibrating with excitement, while Hashial looked terrified. I can't believe we're just going to go talk to them, the young man remarked. Amused, Kida just grinned at him. Stop being a baby. What are you afraid of? They have no reason to attack us. It would be stupid. They attack everyone. They're bandits. Hashial remarked in outrage. So am I. Kida laughed as the blonde young man sputtered in disbelief. By now, their approach had been noted. Several more humans appeared at the cave entrance, and they were all looking toward Black Nail's group with obvious tension. Hello. Black Nail yelled as he waved in their direction. Who are you and what do you want? One of the survivors yelled back. To help you and to have a nice friendly conversation, Black Nail shouted back. The survivors immediately began furiously talking among themselves as Black Nail's group drew closer. Black Nail wasn't wearing a hood, and it seemed like his inhumanity had been noticed. As the two parties met, all the survivors eyed Black Nail warily. They didn't seem to know what to make of the two young humans with him, but their presence did relieve some of their suspicion, just as Black Nail had planned. All the survivors looked worse for wear. Their already rough clothes were torn, and their entire bodies were splattered with dirt. Dark bags hung under their eyes and their faces were unshaven. Black Nail was fairly sure he could smell desperation and hopelessness on them. He could definitely smell a faint hint of sickness, although it was just what you would expect from humans with untreated wounds. A brown-haired man stepped forward and eyed Black Nail. Judging by how you are walking and talking, I'm guessing you are the manhunter, the hobgoblin they call Black Nail. I've heard of you. Yep, that's me. I used to work for Harad the Black Snake, Black Nail replied as he gave the man a friendly smile. He was famous. So then, what have you come here for? The man asked warily. We weren't exactly expecting guests. You seem to have gotten yourselves into a lot of trouble, so I thought I'd help you out. We have the same enemies after all. And what would you want in return for this help? The man asked suspiciously. Black Nail kept smiling. I am currently looking for minions. What if we've had enough of being on the wolf's bad side? Then, you can stay here. I don't want to force you to do anything, Black Nail replied as indifferently as possible. Die if you want. Are you so sure we'd go alone? Another survivor asked angrily. Chuckling, Black Nail let out a loud whistle. Instantly, hobgoblins emerged from out of hiding all around the entrance to the cave. Most of them had bows ready. Silly human, you don't threaten me, Black Nail laughed. Alone, I have killed many more humans than you have here, and I'm far from alone. And I'm here too, Kida added. The leader of the survivors gave the redhead a disgusted look. What are you? His pet. There was a loud crunch as Kida's fist impacted the man's face. Blood streamed from his nose as he flipped over backward. Shocked, the other survivors froze and looked on in disbelief. The young woman had moved with startling speed and power. Fuming mad, Kida glared down at the man she'd felled. I'm no one you should be disrespecting. I'm a warrior and a slosher, one of Black Nail's fiercest lieutenants. Quietly, Black Nail hummed in disagreement to that statement, but he kept his mouth shut. Looking up, Kida focused on the other survivors. Some of you are probably thinking that going up against Warwick is stupid, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Black Nail commands an ever-growing army, and his scouts don't fear the green, as shown by how he tracked your sorry asses down. Warwick can't touch him, and if you sign up with us, we'll get you out of here safely. Then, we'll fill your bellies and tend to your wounds. Well, you have some good points there, especially in the short term, one of the still standing survivors remarked. On the ground, the group's leader stared blankly into space for several seconds and then collapsed backwards into unconsciousness. Black Nail looked down at him and sighed. Someone is going to have to carry him now. Will of Iron 9. You'll be staying here for a while. It's nice and safe, so you should thank me, a lot, Black Nail told the bandits he'd rescued as he led them into the abandoned village his minions were in the process of repairing. It's a dump, one of the men replied with a sneer. Black Nail turned to give the ungrateful bandit a cold look. It will be fixed up soon, and who are you to complain? You were about to die horribly and living in a dirty cave full of bugs. Here, I will be giving you food, water, shelter, and safety. So, bite your tongue or I will rip it out, human. Immediately, the man blanched and pressed his mouth firmly shut. His companions carefully moved away from him so that they were out of the hobgoblin's direct gaze. Black Nail's cold reptilian stare was more than unnerving. Yay, stop your complaining, you ungrateful slob. It's not like all of you are even capable of traveling, Kida observed as she looked toward the two men being carried on stretchers. The rescued bandits had more than a few injuries, and two of them were unable to walk. Luckily, Black Nail had plenty of hobgoblin minions who were more than happy to help out and carry heavy things for their chief. They knew better than to complain. Once the new arrivals were settled in, Black Nail got the uninjured working on repairing some huts for them to sleep in. This also kept them busy, out of trouble, and helped distract them from the reality of being surrounded by hobgoblins. That usually made humans uncomfortable, and these ones were no exception. By the time Black Nail got everything organized, there wasn't much time left until the rendezvous with Geralt's group. Leaving Kida behind to take care of human stuff, Black Nail took a few hobgoblins with him when he went to meet them. He got there without any problems and didn't have to wait long. Geralt and the others arrived early. After a brief conversation where he filled them in on what they'd missed, Black Nail led the humans over to his secret base. They're about what I expected, a sorry bunch of scum, Beardy remarked as he studied the newly recruited bandits. Still, you could do worse, I guess. Several of the bandits had stopped working, or pretending to work, and were staring back at Geralt and the others. The two groups watched each other warily. Black Nail had told them to expect more humans, but they were still nervous about all the things that were happening to them that were beyond their control. If you want to keep these ruffians out of trouble, consider getting them some grog. Man cannot live on bread and water alone. Although, you also don't want them getting drunk, Beardy said before walking over to talk with the newcomers. Black Nail watched the two groups of humans mingle. The newcomers seemed to accept Beardy as an authority figure almost immediately. He only had to punch out one guy. Black Nail could use that. Once Beardy was done staring haughtily down at the newcomers and putting them in their place, Black Nail approached him. I'd like you stay here and be in charge until I get back. I need to visit Iron Break and someone halfway competent has to be in charge here, Black Nail told him. Beardy gave the hobgoblin a skeptical look. What's in it for me? A promotion, lots of gold, and you can actually spend it nearby, Black Nail huffed in reply. Beardy nodded. That's a fair offer. I must admit that I don't feel any pressing need to get back to shelter. So sure, for the proper compensation, I'll watch these grunts for you. I'll be leaving quite a few hobgoblins and goblins as well. Keep them busy repairing this place, and you're going to want to wall up as quickly as they can manage it, Black Nail informed him. Anything else? Maybe I should build a cathedral while I'm here? Beardy asked sarcastically. Ignoring his tone, Black Nail scratched his nose and took a second to think before answering. Warwick's new plan is making him a lot of enemies. They may be weak, but try to gather up any more lost humans you hear about. I'll take care of that. Kida replied as she joined in the conversation. I've already learned about a few leads while I was in town. To get the juiciest gossip, you have to know who to ask. There's always someone who can't keep their mouth shut for even a second. Black Nail hesitated but eventually agreed to let Kida work on finding more men to recruit. Sure, her incompetence meant she was unlikely to accomplish much, but it also meant that he could leave her behind and not deal with her stupidity for a while. Black Nail shuddered as he realized that Kida had been following him around almost constantly for months now. He couldn't even remember what it was like not having to worry about her popping out of nowhere. The things he did for vengeance. Since there was no point in hanging around, and still plenty of light left in the day, Black Nail quickly organized everyone who was returning to shelter and got them moving. He took 3 hobgoblins along and left the others behind at the forward base, but most of the humans that had come with him decided to return. Only half a dozen people from shelter stayed with Beardy and Kida. Black Nail guided the returning party back over to the overgrown road which led to shelter. It took them 2 days to reach their destination, but they managed to do it without any casualties, despite an attack by 2 harpies on an idiot who wandered off to piss. Geralt and the other humans left the group when they reached the village of Shelter, while the hobgoblins continued on to Ironbreak. The goblin settlement was still a buzzing hive of activity, so Black Nail quickly found himself forced to take charge. More and more hobgoblins were transforming and undergoing basic training and indoctrination. There were so many that the tribe had run out of swords. Thus, Black Nail was forced to start training the new hobgoblins with spears instead and keep the swords for marked warriors. Also, since he wasn't much of a spearman, Black Nail had to bring in some human experts to teach. The sudden surge in demand for spears meant that Farrer's forges had to work overtime to produce them. Carts full of charcoal constantly rolled into Ironbreak to feed the fires, and the hammering never stopped as hobgoblin smiths worked wrought iron into spear blades. Other craftsmen carefully produced the weapon's shafts by shaping long pieces of wood and blackening it in fire to harden it. The results were crude weapons, but deadly and easy to use. The road crews were still working on cutting their way through the forest, but they'd slowed down as they got further from Ironbreak. Black Nail had to go out to motivate and reorganize them himself. It would still be a while before the road to Hurst Crest was done, and the repairs to the road south had barely gotten started. Even after a week had passed, Black Nail was too busy to get back to the forward base. On top of everything else, Hera kept taking up a lot of his time. She was insatiable and completely without shame. So, Black Nail had to send a supply caravan south instead of going himself. 24 hobgoblins accompanied 4 huge pigs loaded with supplies. 4 days later, 10 hobgoblins returned with the pigs. They'd successfully completed their mission and delivered the supplies and reinforcements. When 2 weeks had passed, Black Nail finally managed to get everything back under control, and he was ready to lead another force south. This time, he didn't worry about humans. He assembled 30 hobgoblins, a similar number of goblins, and 4 pigs packed with supplies that the forward base couldn't make for itself. The goblins would be easier to feed at the forward base, where there was more forage. Unsurprisingly, the small army of heavily armed goblinoids were not attacked by any beasts, and they made good time down the overgrown road. Black Nail was pleasantly surprised when he reached their destination. A few weeks had made quite the difference. It looked like the hobgoblins and goblins that he'd left behind had been working hard. The forest and all the bushes had been completely pushed out of the village. The roofs on all the stone homes that were still standing had also been thatched, and the holes in their walls had been patched. There was even some new construction. The beginnings of a crude wall similar to the one around in Ronbarik could be seen, and off to the side, there was a long log cabin under construction. Black Nail had ordered his minions to start building a barracks as soon as possible, so that was probably it. To fulfill its purpose, the forward base was going to have to be able to hold a lot of troops and supplies. Upon Black Nail's arrival, Beardy leisurely strolled out of one of the huts and approached. "So, you're back now. I see you brought a lot more hobgoblins." "There's lots of work to be done here," Black Nail replied. Beardy snorted rudely. "Right, I suppose they're all here to help build huts." Black Nail grinned and shook his head. "No, the wall. We need to get that done before something nasty with teeth tries to come and eat my workers or you." "Did anything important happen here while I was gone? Like attacks by things with lots of teeth?" "Well, if any goblins got picked off, I didn't notice it." "Kida has been busy, though," Beardy admitted with a frown. "She has actually managed to find a few more recruits." "Really?" Black Nail asked. He was surprised. Where had she found them? Under a rock. Were they human? "Yay, she's been traveling around the area, and on one of her trips she stumbled upon a dozen starving highwaymen. She apparently beat a few of them up and then the others joined her for the food. Things are getting pretty rough out there. Warwick is really cracking down on everything." Black Nail frowned. "Where is Kida now?" "Out on the road, scouting and looking for more recruits." "She should be back soon, though," Beardy replied. "She only took half a dozen men with her. That lass is way too overconfident in her own skills, even if she is a vessel." "She's dumb," Black Nail agreed. "But enough about her. I've another job for you. All the hobgoblins here need trained to use their spears. I know you can do that." "Sure, as long as I get paid for my effort," Beardy replied. After talking to Beardy for a bit more and giving him a few more yellow rocks, Black Nail inspected the base and then went to find some people to boss around. It didn't take him long to discover some minions that weren't working fast enough in his opinion. Obviously, they needed to be motivated by some proper angry yelling and threats. Kida got back a few hours later, and she immediately sought Black Nail out when she learned he was there. She found him supervising the construction of the wall at the far end of the village. "Hey Black Nail, guess what? I found some new minions," she said as she ran over to him. There was very smug look on her face, which annoyed Black Nail. "So Beardy told me," he replied neutrally. "Good job, why don't you come help build this wall? Another pair of hands would help." I have some more important stuff to do. See you later," Kida replied before hurrying away. Black Nail smirked after her. He'd been fairly certain that would work. Black Nail hung around the base for a few days, while supervising the work on the wall. It went quickly with him around to keep goblins and hobgoblins in line. There were dozens of them and they had access to iron axes and shovels, so on the 4th day, they completed the barrier. While the construction had been ongoing, Beardy had been drilling the hobgoblins on spear fighting tactics, and the work had finished on the first barracks. A second big building was already being planned. There was a smile on Black Nail's lips as he walked away from the completed wall. Everything was going according to plan. Now, he just needed to talk to Beardy. What is it? Beardy asked. The hobgoblin stepped into his house. Black Nail smirked at the man. He was in for a shock. It was time to stop concealing his real intentions. Now that I have a secure base, I plan on taking control of the nearby roads. I want to start charging the merchants a toll, like Harad used to. I knew you were up to no good. Just scouting, my ass, Beardy swore. You must know that Warwick will respond, right? Even if things are still settling into place, he is the unchallenged Lord of the North, right now. Black Nail couldn't help himself. He started laughing, and it took him a few moments to stop. If only the humans knew. They still underestimated him so much. That's the plan, Black Nail explained to Beardy as he grinned savagely. The man seemed taken aback, but Black Nail couldn't help himself. He had been keeping this to himself for too long. He had to unburden himself and reveal to someone how amazing he truly was. It has taken so long to get here. So many dark nights and long days spent stewing in hatred and loss. Countless hours fighting my own hunger for revenge, Black Nail continued. Now, I will feast. The wolf took my master. Did you think I would forgive or forget? No, he will die. I will rip his bleeding carcass apart with my bare hands and put his head on a spike. Oh, and how are you going to accomplish that feat? Beardy asked carefully. In case you haven't noticed, he's an undefeated vessel, and he's got a massive army. Black Nail just kept grinning. I will lay a trap for him. The right trap can catch any prey, and the wolf has no idea that I am hunting him. He thinks himself invincible, and that I am one hobgoblin alone. He is deliciously wrong. When my minions show themselves on the road, the hobgoblins will disguise themselves and stay behind the humans. Everyone will think they are more dumb human bandits and nothing more. That's the only reason I need you and the other humans. A flash of understanding appeared in Beardy's eyes. If it looks like an organized band has seized this territory from him, he just might lead a small force of his own to destroy them. He wouldn't be able to trust the job to anyone else. But I am not some simple human thief, Black Nail agreed. I am so much more. When he comes, I will meet him with hundreds of hobgoblins. We will hunt them in the dark and through the green. My minions will blast them with magic fire, and I am not without vessels and allies. Like me, the vampires are predators. The bloody scent of a weakened rival will draw them in. Beardy stared at Black Nail for several long seconds without saying anything. His face was frozen by shock and his mouth hung open. However, eventually, his jaw swung shut. It just might work. No, it will probably work, he admitted with obvious disbelief. He then turned to Black Nail and studied him. It was obvious he was reevaluating everything he'd thought he knew about the hobgoblin. Wait, you planned everything, didn't you? Beardy said. He stuttered as a realization hit him. Everything that has happened since Harad's fall, you've been manipulating everyone. Us bandits, the people of shelter, everyone. It's the only way you could have done this. It has fallen together too perfectly. Black Nail smirked in amusement. Yes, it wasn't that hard. You're all just human, and it is easy to get into your heads. Your fear makes you prey. But you shouldn't worry about that. Think about what will happen when we defeat Warwick. The north will be ours. You could set yourself up as a king. Beardy hesitated, but then nodded in agreement. Fine, but my bloody name is Ralphie, not Beardy. You'd better start using it from now on, you moon-crazy hobgoblin. Enough with that cursed nickname or yours. Even if I'm a king, if I have to reign as King Beardy, it's not worth it. Sure, whatever, Black Nail replied. Beardy was his nickname? It wasn't a very good one. Why had he never brought up his real name before if he hated it so much? What a weirdo. Will of Iron 10. Grinning, Black Nail walked out from behind a tree at the edge of the woods. He watched with barely contained excitement as his minions emerged from the forest at a run and suddenly surrounded the unexpected caravan that was passing by. They moved in two groups. Black Nail and one party of bandits blocked the caravan's way forward, while the other cut off their retreat. It was a fair-sized merchant convoy, containing 5 large wagons and over 30 people, but Black Nail's minions had them outnumbered by a bit. This was going to be fun. There were cries of alarm from both humans and pack beasts as the caravan came to a sudden stop. Weapons quickly appeared in the hands of many of the merchants and their guards. However, Black Nail's bandits didn't attack, and the people in the caravan began to talk nervously amongst themselves as they waited for the bandits to make their move. Black Nail had organized his forces carefully to give off the right impression. Most of the minions he'd brought were human, and the hobgoblins that were present were wearing hoods and keeping to the back. They'd been ordered to keep out of sight, and were only really there to pad Black Nail's numbers. Thus, the merchants undoubtedly thought all the bandits were human. When Black Nail thought the merchants had stewed long enough, he gave Beardy, who was standing right beside him, the go-ahead. Right, he was supposed to call the man Ralphie now. That was hard to remember. Hail the caravan! Ralphie yelled, which caused a brief stir among the merchants. I see you, and I know robbers when I see them. What do you want? One of their number yelled back a moment later. He was a portly man with a mustache, and judging by his fancy red coat, he seemed to be in charge of the caravan. If you're expecting an easy target, you're going to be disappointed. We will protect our cargo and our families with both our lives and cold steel. Well, you're in luck then, Ralphie replied. All we want is a little toll. The merchant scowled. And why would we give you criminals any of our hard-earned coin? We would starve if we let every ragged band of scavengers in the north walk over us, and we're more than ready to defend what's ours. How about because we have you outnumbered and we're far nastier fighters than a bunch of peddlers? Testing our resolve would be a mistake, Ralphie replied dryly. Maybe, but you're all deserters and cowards, or you wouldn't be out here. Attempt to harm our livelihoods or families and you'll find out that we have stiffer spines than that. Hey, are you calling me a coward? I've killed men for far less, Kida shouted as she stepped forward. The redhead was obviously trying to look angry, but it didn't work, and she immediately got several confused glances. Ralphie sighed loudly and glared at the merchant. I think you'll find our toll to be more than reasonable, and if you pay it, there will be no reason for your families to be involved at all. The lead merchant didn't seem convinced by Ralphie's logic or scared enough to back down, so Blacknail decided it was time for him to step in. Scaring humans was his specialty, and as the leader, he was also the best arguer in the tribe. Still grinning, Blacknail sauntered out from among the other bandits. Immediately, most the merchant's eyes were drawn to him, causing a new chorus of nervous chatter as they took in his unconcealed visage. He was a handsome hobgoblin. I think you should be smart and just pay the toll, Blacknail announced as he came to stop in front of his minions. There was silence for a moment, before the head merchant spoke up again. You're him, aren't you? The hobgoblin they call the Blacknail. I thought you were dead. Blacknail nodded. That's me, and I'm not dead. I'm the leader here. That means you need to do as I say. How much is this toll of yours exactly? The head merchant asked. Blacknail's arrival had clearly surprised him and forced him to re-evaluate his position. Sighing, Blacknail scratched the side of his and put on a fake confused expression of his own. I'm not good with counting. How about 20 silver coins? I like that number. The merchant hesitated. 20 silvers wasn't a lot for a caravan the size of his, in fact it was rather low. That was fine with Blacknail, though. Only his human minions really needed coins anyway, and he wanted word of his low rates to spread. And you'll let us pass unmolested if we give you the silver. Sure, I like shiny silvers, Blacknail replied with a happy nod. Just pay the money and I won't have to hurt you, Kida added. Alright, the merchant replied as he gave Blacknail and Kida a skeptical look. He seemed to have decided to ignore the redhead, which was a smart move. The hobgoblin ignored the man's expression and sent Ralphie forward to get the money. Soon after that, the caravan was once again headed down the road while the bandits watched from the edge of the forest. Do you think he bought the act? Ralphie asked. Blacknail nodded. Probably, you humans always think hobgoblins are dumber than you. That's one of the many reasons you're so easy to kill. Plus, we had Kida with us, so he probably thinks we're stupider than a hat made of rocks. Kida smiled smugly. Yay, I'm an amazing actor. If I wasn't even better at robbing people, I might have become a temple player. Ralphie ignored the redhead. Well, this is definitely a tale he'll be telling everyone he meets, so we don't have to worry about that. Grinning, Blacknail agreed. Even if he doesn't talk, there will be plenty of other merchants who will. Warwick will hear of this soon, and he will know that I'm the one in charge. I'm a loose end. He had me defeated, but I escaped from right under his pink nose. He will be worried about me feeling back into the green and want to finish me himself. The wolf is who we really have to fool, Ralphie remarked. We don't want him to think this is a trap. If he brings all the troops and resources he has to bear, we won't be able to touch him. He is undefeated, and no one dares challenge him directly. He will be not suspect danger, and besides, he is trying to control a vast territory. He can't empty it to come after a hobgoblin, Blacknail replied as he gazed off toward the horizon above the trees. There, several tall white-peaked mountains rose above the forest. Blacknail took a moment to take in the scenery and think. The caravan was now out of sight, and on its way. It was inevitable now. Word of what he'd just done would reach Warwick. Suppressing a sudden nervous twinge, the hobgoblin went back to work. Since the territory Blacknail had taken was quite large and included 3 separate roads, he had to split up his minions and have groups patrol the other roads that didn't run near his base. Thankfully, he had trusted human minions he could put in charge of these patrols. They were knowledgeable enough to react properly to unexpected situations. On top of the patrols, Blacknail also sent out hobgoblin scout teams to watch for threats. The initial part of Blacknail's scheme worked perfectly. More merchants passed through his territory and paid his toll. Despite some hostility, he wasn't forced to attack any of them. Thus, word soon spread of his low rates and honesty. This in turn attracted more merchants and travelers. When Blacknail himself wasn't present, a specially trained hobgoblin pretended to be him. It wasn't like the humans could tell the difference. There were a few unexpected wrinkles, though. Merchants weren't the only people to pass through his territory. Soon, a group of refugees from the south entered his territory. They had been traveling with some peddlers for safety, but the peddlers didn't want to pay their toll. And they don't have the money. Blacknail asked Ralphie skeptically as he glared at the refugees. His fee was next to nothing. How could they not have it? Sigh. They were making this rather complicated for him. It was inconsiderate of them. Blacknail and Ralphie were both standing in the middle of the road. There were several more bandits behind them, and 15 cowering refugees in front of them. The impoverished travelers were all on foot and wearing ragged clothing, although they did have 1 small cart and 3 donkeys. Off to the side were the peddlers. They'd paid their part of the toll and were now obviously trying to stay out of sight and mind. They say they don't, and I believe them, Ralphie replied with an unsympathetic shrug. Blacknail groaned. So, do we drop the price or kill them as a lesson for the others? I don't think they have any money left, and killing them wouldn't really convince other refugees to carry more money. That's not how that works. Their homes were destroyed by an enemy army. If they had some way of getting their hands on coin they wouldn't be here. What would Herod do in this situation? Black Nail asked him. Ralphie shrugged. Kill some of them, take the young women prisoner as entertainment for the men, and chase away the rest. Of course, that was before her doomed territory-grabbing scheme. I'm not sure what she would have done after that. I don't suppose any of them are swordsmiths? Black Nail asked. Farrer was still looking for one of those. Ralphie snorted. As if, anyone with a skill like that would be scooped up by the closest army faster than a solider spends his pay. Black Nail walked forward and addressed the crowd of refugees, as they fearfully fell back away from him. Are you useful for anything? Or, should I just kill you all? A tall woman in a dirty dress with a determined look on her face stepped forward. We are far from useless. We're upright and hard-working people. You won't find hardier folk than us. Times have simply been tough and made us desperate. And what was it you used to work so hard at? Black Nail asked her. Well, mostly we're farmers. Admittedly, that's not exactly a sought-after skill up here in the north, Mr. Black Nail, but we're good people just looking for safety. Our village was destroyed by King Nameless armies and we had no choice but to flee up here, lest all our menfolk get conscripted by the Baron and us women forced into becoming camp followers. We're just looking for a second chance. By the gods' graces, please find it within yourself to let us pass. Black Nail gave her a blank stare. No. Shock and despair displaced the determined look on the woman's face. She looked like she was about to cry. So, this the end. After all we've been through, we're to be killed by a monster and his gang of northern brutes. Black Nail rolled his eyes. We could do that too, but actually I've got a whole bunch of land I need farmed, and I know some human villages to the north where you could live. They are looking for people. The woman blinked in surprise. Really? Yes, they used to be cut off by the forest, but I saved them. I do that a lot, Black Nail told her. A lean man that was holding the hand of a child found the courage to speak up. And you're not taking us as slaves or anything. That would be more work than it's worth. I'll just drop you off at a village and you can settle there and help them grow food. None of them keep slaves and I've got plenty of stuff to trade for food anyway, Black Nail replied. There might also be some charges for road use and protection later, but he didn't need to bring those up right now. As the peddlers were sent further up the road, the refugees were gathered up by Ralphie and taken to the forward base. Black Nail expected the supply caravan to get back soon, and then he could send the refugees with them back to shelter. Days passed. After the first group of refugees was sent north, more of them began to arrive. It seemed that word of a safe haven for refugees had been spread by the peddlers. It said a lot about how desperate people were that they even considered throwing themselves at the mercy of a hobgoblin, although apparently many people considered Black Nail to be Ralphie's figurehead. Some people even thought Kiddo was the real chieftain, which was really dumb. However, refugees and merchants weren't the only people who were attracted by rumors of Black Nail's operation. Thugs and ruffians began to show up looking for work as bandits. Black Nail was always looking for new minions, but he wasn't sure how useful or trustworthy these new people would be. Most of them seemed to be out to earn a quick profit, and probably couldn't be trusted to stand firm in a fight with Warwick's troops. There was also the matter of possible spies. Now that Black Nail's activities were common knowledge, it would be surprising if various people didn't try to send spies to infiltrate his tribe and learn more about him and his goals. After talking the situation over with Ralphie, Black Nail decided to accept the new recruits, but he had each of them shadowed by a hobgoblin. If they tried to leave or meet up with any outsiders, they wouldn't get far. News from the south also began to reach Black Nail's minions. It seemed like the human wars had grown more intense. The king of Eloria had invaded Hulgaron again, and the nobility there had allied to repulse him. That meant that a new round of conscription had been started, and that was why so many refugees were headed north. After things had been going smoothly for a few weeks, Black Nail left the forward base in the hands of Ralphie and went back to Iron Break to check on things there. He'd been away for a while, and there were things he needed to do. It was early yet, but it was possible that Warwick might react soon. Black Nail had to be ready, just in case. He left behind a further expanded forward base. Alongside the repaired homes, it had 4 large barracks. The walled complex housed almost 100 troops. Once back at Iron Break, Black Nail met up with Gob and his other supervisors. None of them had too much to report. He'd left them all with lots of work that they were still struggling to accomplish. Farrer was running the forges, while Imp busied himself making mana stones, and Rolly managed the food supply. When he was sure no one was slacking off or doing something wrong, Black Nail began rounding up hobgoblins and organizing an army. It was time to make all the slackers earn their meals. Although some hobgoblins already had important permanent jobs, such as craftsmen or supervisors, a lot of them floated around and did temporary work. It was these that Black Nail formed into the bulk of his force. Unfortunately, this meant that work on side projects, like clearing the roads, ground to halt. However, Black Nail soon had over 100 hobgoblins training to fight in formation with spears. Among them, there were 24 warriors with swords. Black Nail trusted them to fight better and harder than the others. They were probably even a match for an average human bandit one-on-one. When combined with the forces already at the forward base, Black Nail would have well over 200 troops. Honestly, the hobgoblin chief was surprised about how well things were going and how obedient his minions were being. Everything seemed to be running on momentum. He had the hobgoblins working so hard that they didn't have time to question it. Everyone else was obeying, so they did too. Every hobgoblin could feel the energy in the air and knew that significant events were underway. Even if none of them understood what was happening, they didn't want to be left behind. The other thing Black Nail needed to do was send a message to Hurst Crest. He didn't have time to go himself, so he had Geralt write a letter for him, and planned to send some hobgoblins to deliver it. He didn't trust a hobgoblin to remember his exact words, and the details were important. In the letter, Black Nail informed Elicity that Warwick might be showing himself soon, and that he would probably be brining a small army with him. This would obviously prevent the Vimpur from bringing in more of his people from his old lands in the west. The letter also politely informed the Vimpur that this meant Black Nail would be forced to recall the hunters he'd lent him and stop work on the roads until the wolf problem was solved. Perhaps, Elicity might want to prepare his own men to come help kill the wolf, especially if he was vulnerable. That would certainly eliminate the biggest threat to Hurst Crest. Yes, I think this is the proper phrasing and tone for such a message, Geralt remarked as he finished writing down Black Nail's words. I didn't threaten him at all. I was all subtle, and just told him what his own interests are. He'd be stupid not to send troops to fight Warwick, and now he can't ignore that truth. A lot of humans avoid the obvious until it starts biting their face, Black Nail said. He was speaking from experience. Sometimes he was the obvious. When the letter was placed in a secure pouch, Black Nail gave it to a pair of scouts, and they hurried off to deliver it. After that, Black Nail no longer had any pressing business that needed his attention, so he took some time off to relax. He set aside an entire day for napping and eating, and assigned a bodyguard with a club to chase away anyone but Gob that tried to approach him. Sometimes it was nice to just sleep on a full stomach and not have to worry about other people's stupid problems. Unfortunately, when his break day was over, Black Nail had to get back to work. In particular, he needed to help train the army. They had to get used to obeying orders from him, and he had to know what orders to give. It turned out that leading an army involved more than just pointing out the enemy and giving the attack order. Thankfully, some of his human minions who had been in a real army were able to give him some pointers. However, Black Nail didn't have unlimited time. After a few days, a pair of runners reached Iron Break. They'd come from the forward base with news from Ralphie. Warwick was moving. Rumors were already swirling. They said the wolf was moving to crush the upstarts that had dared to steal territory from him. Some peddlers had also reported seeing troops on the move. It was time. Black Nail sent Elicity another message and then ordered his army out onto the road. He took Gob with him and left Rolly in charge. Black Nail didn't really care too much about Iron Break right now, and he wanted his best minion with him. Killing Warwick and avenging Cedar was all that mattered. Will of Iron 11. Black Nail's army moved through the forest with more confidence than the largest of drakes. They trampled the undergrowth and made no attempt to hide their presence as they traveled south along the abandoned road. They were at home in the green and there was safety in numbers. Even a drake would hesitate when confronted by over 100 hobgoblins marching in formation with spears over their shoulders, if only out of surprise. This was a degree of cooperation that was completely alien to the nature of hobgoblins. Any watcher would have doubted their eyes. This wasn't something that could have happened in the world they knew, but that world was gone, and a new one was being born. Under Black Nail's watchful eye, the Black Mark War Party moved at a quick pace until they reached their forward base. Any laggards or slouchers quickly learned to fear Black Nail's attention. Gob and him were both quick to punish anyone that stepped out of line. Once they got to their destination, Black Nail marched his troops inside and began settling them into place. A fourth barracks was almost completed, but they were still short of shelter for everyone. It was a good thing that all the hobgoblins were rugged and used to conditions that would have dismayed a human. They thought nothing of sleeping outside and could quickly scavenge up some shelter. Thanks to word sent ahead by scouts, Ralphie immediately came out to greet Black Nail and help organize everything. Warwick's forces have set up near the border of our territory. They're sending out scouts, which I have hobgoblins watching, but I'm not exactly sure what they're up to. I was expecting them to be more aggressive. Right now, all they seem to be doing is diverting any caravans headed in our direction. Black Nail's eyes narrowed as he listened intently. How many humans are there, and is Warwick with them? This is pointless unless we trap the wolf. Your scouts have reported around 300 enemy troops, although most of them can't count very well, so that maybe not be the most accurate count. They all seem to be the usual bandit rabble, with no cavalry or heavy infantry support. As for Warwick, his personal flag is flying and some of the scouts have claimed to have seen someone matching his description. I believe them too. Warwick is hard to miss. Good. Good, Black Nail replied with an excited smirk. That was more troops than he'd been hoping to face, but the plan was still workable. As long as Warwick didn't know what he was up against, he would let his guard drop, and Black Nail had several surprises ready that could even the odds. Once the new troops were billeted, Black Nail began organizing another supply caravan. Even with hunting and foraging, it was going to be difficult to keep the army and the forward base supplied. When that was done, Ralphie had some requests. I'd like to start training the new troops with the ones you left here with me. The hobs you brought with you seem to know one end of a spear from the other, but there is a lot more to being a soldier than that. They need to drill and learn to move and fight in formation. To fight Warwick's men, they're going to need every advantage they can get, but a proper wedge of spears should help even things up considerably. Spears are better than swords? Black Nail asked. He didn't have much experience with them. Ralphie snorted. When used right, they are. They're just not the easiest weapon to haul across the north, and most bandits are lazy bums. They prefer a weapon they can strap to their hip or back and forget about, and I've yet to meet a chief that ran formation drills. Since Black Nail had no plans to attack Warwick in strength for a while yet, he gave Ralphie permission to run some exercises for the troops and had Gob help him. Even though Warwick was tantalizingly close, Black Nail could almost smell him on the wind. Patience was required. The trap had not yet closed completely. The prey had to be drawn in further. After talking to Ralphie a bit more, Black Nail came up with his next move. He was going to irritate Warwick with 100 small cuts. That would hopefully anger the wolf and lure him in, while also giving his troops a chance to train. There was also the matter of reinforcements. Black Nail was still hoping to get some. Attacking 300 human thugs with his current forces would end badly for him. His hobgoblins were not equal to human bandits in a one-on-one fight. Not only were they slightly smaller, but they were also far less experienced. Thus, to begin his plan to even the odds, Black Nail rounded up his best scouts and sent them out in small groups to harass Warwick and blind him by taking out his rangers and sentries. They also had orders to attack and kill the men Warwick was using to divert caravans if possible. Black Nail was confident that his hobgoblins would make quick work of Warwick's rangers. Black Nail was also extremely tempted to go with them. He wanted to hunt and cut his way closer to his prey, however slowly, but he resisted the urge. Harad hadn't led scouting missions. As the leader, she had needed to be at the center of things where she could be found by everyone and quickly take command. However, once his hobgoblin stalkers left to complete their mission, Black Nail began to feel anxious. There was nothing more he could do personally. He wasn't even able to help much with the troops' training, although he did take part a few times so that he could learn all the commands Ralphie was using. Days passed uneventfully, and Black Nail grew sullen. He spent his free time watching the road for any signs of movement. That wasn't the best use of his time, but he was tired of waiting around and wanted something to happen. Both Kida and Hera tried to talk to Black Nail. In Hera's case, she wanted more than talk, but he sent them away with a snarl. He was in no mood to talk. Instead, he kept waiting and watching. As time passed, the scouts kept reporting no movement from Warwick's troops, even though he was slowly losing men. Black Nail had expected the wolf to react at least a little to that. What was he doing? Arg. Was there something here that he'd missed? It wasn't until a few days had gone by that Black Nail's questions were answered. When he was eating lunch back at the base, a pair of anxious-looking scouts ran over to deliver him news. Another large mob of human troops was approaching from the other direction. They numbered over 100. Black Nail scowled and grunted in frustration. These humans were obviously reinforcements for Warwick, and if they met up with him he would have well over 400 soldiers. That was far too many for Black Nail to risk attacking with his 200 hobgoblins. We could ambush them before they met up with their boss, Ralphie suggested. Black Nail grimaced and shook his head. We would still lose troops and Warwick would learn of our strength and hidden weapons. We will wait and see what happens. The wolf is our true target. That was all they could do. That was all Black Nail could do. Despair and anger welled up within the hobgoblin, but he kept it under control by enforcing the discipline thinking Cedar had taught him during sword training. He'd had a lot of practice when it came to suppressing his emotions, and it wasn't over yet. There might still be a way to get to Warwick. He had to be patient. As more reports from the scouts filtered in, a clearer picture of what was happening began to emerge. Much to both Black Nail and Ralphie's surprise, the new division of troops didn't move to join Warwick. Instead, they took up position on the main road at the edge of Black Nail's territory, and Warwick sent 100 of his own troops to join them. He's boxing us in, Ralphie observed as the latest scout finished his report. He didn't bring so many troops because he was expecting heavy resistance. He brought them so that he could encircle us. He thinks we're a normal robber band hiding in the woods, so he's trying to isolate us and starve us out. It's a mistake, Black Nail observed as his anxiety began to drain away and be replaced by excitement. Ralphie nodded and grinned. Yep, it seems like he is underestimating us after all. We have more than enough men to bring either of his divisions to battle. And although he has no way of knowing it, we could also just slip away through the green or keep getting supplied almost indefinitely by Iron Break. He knows I'm here, but he doesn't know that I'm no longer just a ranger, Black Nail mused aloud as he tried to get inside his prey's head. He isn't sure that he can get me, since I can slip away into the green, and I'm the real threat to him. But, if he slaughters all my human allies then that will scare away any others who I might recruit later. I would be defanged if no one dared work with me. Ralphie laughed. Shows what he knows. Men aren't even a quarter of your forces anyway. He has no eyes in the green, thus he cannot see my strength, Black Nail agreed. So, let the wolf think his plan is working, while we prepare to strike. You are the most cunning and mightiest leader in the north, chief. The wolf will soon be dead at your awesome feet. Gob added with an enthusiastic nod. Black Nail just rolled his eyes. Both divisions of Warwick's forces began sending out large armed patrols of around 50 men to probe into Black Nail's territory. By this time, all merchant traffic had been stopped already, so the patrols were undoubtedly meant to scout the roadways for signs of Black Nail's camp. They were also probably bait, meant to draw Black Nail out, so instead of attacking them directly, Black Nail simply harassed them. He had his minions fire at them from concealment and then fade away, while he watched and waited for the right opportunity. That opportunity arrived at noon the next day with his reinforcements. Guided by hobgoblins, a force from Hurst Crest arrived. They numbered only around 30 heavy infantry, but Illisti was leading them. They were escorting a supply caravan from Iron Break, which was led by Imp, and Geralt was with them. Black Nail hadn't invited him, but he'd wanted to see what was going on. Black Nail hurried over to talk to Imp first. The hobgoblin mage had brought a dozen hobgoblin and goblin helpers, and they were carrying the equipment Black Nail had asked for. Black Nail grinned as he studied it, and then greeted Illisti and called for a war conference, which Kida wasn't invited to. Now that Black Nail had magical support, the next priority was bringing Illisti up to speed and making sure he was committed to helping. The noble Vimper had his own concerns and motivations. He wasn't Black Nail's servant and had to be handled carefully. This might be workable after all, Illisti remarked thoughtfully after he'd learned of the situation from Ralphie. I wasn't sure what to expect when I got here. We will never have a better chance to kill the wolf. He has walked into our trap unaware, and with him gone, no one in all the north will be able to threaten us, Black Nail agreed. Quite a few people here also owe him for killing our poor companions and chasing us survivors into green, Geralt remarked sourly as Ralphie grunted in vague agreement. Now that all the hard work had been done, they didn't mind getting some vengeance. So, do you have a plan of attack, then? Illisti asked the hobgoblin. What's our first target? There are several options. Do you want to start taking out the patrols? They are the obvious first step. Black Nail shook his head. My target hasn't changed. It's Warwick. The other humans are nothing. We strike him when he is weakest, after sending out a patrol. Then, we surround his camp and attack with everything we have before he realizes the danger he is in. That is how we catch him. He must not have a chance to escape. Illisti grinned and nodded. I like it. It's a bold and aggressive strategy. Worthy of a warrior. We go for his throat before he has a chance to raise his defenses. Ralphie wasn't so sure, though. He grimaced. That plan will pit our hobgoblin forces directly against Warwick's human troops. The entire battle plan will depend on them, and they are untested. If they can stay in a tight formation and remember the drills, they should be able to push Warwick's men back, but if not, they will hold. I will make sure they all know the price of failure, Black Nail replied darkly. If he had to beat the training into every single hobgoblin personally, he would. That probably wouldn't be necessary, though. This was why he'd brought Gob. When they were done planning, Black Nail's minions and allies took a day off to rest and make some final reparations. Supplies were packed up and Black Nail oversaw the last training regimen. When the day of the attack came, Black Nail's forces and allies got up just as the sun was beginning to peak above the horizon. It was still dark out as the hobgoblins and bandits grabbed their gear and formed up into lines. As the morning chorus of birdsong began, they were marching down the road. Scouts ranged far ahead to detect patrols and silence sentries as they marched toward Warwick's camp. They used a back road that slowed their pace but allowed them to circle around and hopefully avoid any early morning patrols. Black Nail led the main party. Behind him marched almost 300 troops, both human and hobgoblin. Beside him were Illisti and Ralphie, while Imp and Black Nail's human minions were mixed in with the troops. Geralt had remained behind to oversee the base, and Kida was leading her own followers. Pride and excitement filled Black Nail. He had done it. He'd built his army. The idea had seemed impossible all those months ago when he'd first had the idea, but here he was, marching an army toward his nemesis. Sure, he'd originally planned on having more humans and far less hobgoblins, but that didn't matter. Soon, his forces would engage the wolves, and he would have his chance at vengeance. Blood would pay for blood, and Cedar would be avenged. The wolf would finally realize the error he'd made in taking from Black Nail. After Warwick's decapitated head was decorating a spike in iron break, no one would dare do that again. As they approached their target, scouts returned and reported that a patrol of 50 men had just left Warwick's camp and was heading away down the main road. From experience, Black Nail knew that they wouldn't be returning before noon, and that was more than enough time. With a savage grin, Black Nail ordered his forces to come to halt and called his commanders and allies to a meeting. We will split into 2 groups and attack with fury and speed, Black Nail explained. First my rangers will go in and clear out their sentries. Then, my spear bearers and Illisti's men will charge through the front, while I take the rangers and skirmishers and go attack their back through the green. Gob and Ralphie will command my spear bearers and Imp will support them. Very well, that sounds workable, Illisti agreed. My troops and I will aid in the frontal assault. I look forward to clashing with this wolf, and any false blood champions he may have in his service. I doubt they've ever seen a true noble's might. Since the Vimper was the only one who didn't have to obey Black Nail, that meant the plan was a go. After ending the meeting, Black Nail needed time to get into position, so he quickly went and ordered his irregulars to follow him as he headed off into the trees. There, several hobgoblin rangers that had scouted ahead led him toward his target. They looped around the enemy and approached them from the back. Kida and Hera both tried to accompany Black Nail, but he sent Kida back to the main force. She had her own troops to look after. Once away from the bushes that grew in the sun along the road, the hobgoblins passed into the shadowy depths beyond. Here, the thick canopy overhead that blocked out the rising sun was supported by countless tall trees. Some of the thinner trunks had white bark that peeled away like paper and others had dark brown bark that was thick and scaly. The ground was clear of anything but small plants, but it was uneven, and tangles of roots jutted up from the dark earth. However, the hobgoblin irregulars moved through the forest with silent stealth and swift ease. Every one of them had been born into the green and knew it well. Soon, they passed a pair of fallen human sentries with slit throats that had been left to bleed out at the base of a tree. A few minutes later, the edge of the forest appeared in front of them. The trees thinned and then became a hedge of thorny bushes. Here, there was another dead human sprawled out on the ground, and 2 hobgoblin scouts with long cloaks waiting. Black Nail gave them an approving nod as he slowed and walked over to the bushes. Peering through them, he saw Warwick's camp. The wolf has set up in a clearing next to the road. It wasn't a very defensible spot, as it could be approached from every direction. However, there was a fair stretch of open ground to cross until the first rows of tents and the camp proper started. That would have made it difficult for a small group to sneak in unseen, but that wasn't Black Nail's plan this time. When he moved, he would have a distraction and he would be doing it in force. The camp was made up of several large clusters of blue triangular tents. Black Nail recognized them from Warwick's attack on Herod's base. Around the tents, countless humans walked and worked. There were also a few wagons and horses. Black Nail's eyes were drawn to one large round tent in the center of the camp. A wolf's head flag flew above it, marking it as Warwick's own. Behind Black Nail, his troops formed a loose battle line. All the hobgoblins wore mismatched outfits made up of looted human gear and tanned hides. They also carried a mix of weapons such as swords, axes, and spears. However, they were all wearing bloodthirsty smiles. The looming prospect of violence excited them, and an unsuspecting enemy lay before them. "We're ready, boss. Just give the word," Herod told Black Nail. "Soon," the hobgoblin chief replied as he turned to stare at Warwick's tent. "Soon, my long hunt will be over. Soon, my thirst for the wolf's blood will finally be sated." Will of Iron 12. Turning to stare intently at Warwick's tent, Black Nail waited for the signal that would announce the beginning of Gob and Illisty's assault. Fidgeting, he licked his lips and ran his tongue over the sharp points of his teeth. His minions should already be moving into place, but it was hard to wait for them. Black Nail's chest felt tight and uncomfortable as anxiety bubbled up within him. Suddenly, several of Warwick's men near the road began shouting. Soon, the cry was taken up by others and the entire camp came alive as bandits began running around in every direction. It looked like someone had finally spotted the Black Mark tribe's main force approaching. Finally. Hidden in the bushes at the edge of the clearing, Black Nail grinned and watched the commotion intently. Judging by all the panic, it seemed like Black Nail's force had caught the enemy off guard with their sudden assault. The wolf wasn't a fool, though. Despite being surprised by the sudden appearance of an army from nowhere, it was obvious that Warwick hadn't allowed his troops to slack off. He'd obviously been expecting Black Nail to try something, even if he didn't know what. Not only had he posted several layers of sentries, but as Black Nail watched, over a third of Warwick's forces quickly formed up into ranks and marched toward the road. The wolf had kept quite a large portion of his army ready for action. That was annoying, but to be honest, Black Nail hadn't really expected things to go too easily. Annoyed and still anxious, Black Nail scowled as he watched bandits run back and forth through the camp. Within a few moments, almost all the camp would be up and armed. Still, Black Nail waited and his patience was rewarded as he spotted someone emerge from the big tent at the center of the enemy camp. It was a tall muscular man wearing a long fur cloak and a helmet shaped like a wolf's head. A spike of hungry excitement stabbed through Black Nail's chest as he watched the man march over toward the road and the troops forming up there. At last. Warwick had shown himself. Cedar's killer was right where Black Nail wanted him. Most of Warwick's force was armed now, although there were lots of stragglers still rushing around. Then, on the road across the camp, Black Nail's main force appeared. Holding up rows of spears, they marched toward the enemy at a quick pace. From this distance, it was hard to tell that most of the attackers weren't human. The hobgoblins' scavenged gear covered most of their skin. Black Nail wished he was close enough to see the reaction of the human bandits when they realized what they were fighting. When Warwick reached his troops, he began yelling, and the entire formation started moving to cut off their attackers' advance. Although more men were still running out to join Warwick, the camp was mostly empty now. It wasn't unguarded, though. A small rearguard of about a dozen men had stayed behind. Warwick was still playing it safe, and that frustrated Black Nail. He couldn't see a way to get to Warwick before the two main forces collided. By then, Illisty would probably get to him first. Black Nail wanted to be the one to snuff the life from the wolf. As the wedge of hobgoblin spearmen marched toward the mob of human bandits, there was a sudden boom. Immediately, a twisting ball of air shot out from near the center of Warwick's troops and zoomed toward their charging enemy. That was what Black Nail had been waiting for. Warwick had deployed his mage. His attention was now completely focused forward. Now. Charge like your ugly green asses are on fire, or they will be. The last hob into battle gets my sword in his guts, Black Nail roared at his nearby minions as he burst out of the bushes and began running into the clearing. His screaming minions immediately charged after their boss. His threats were entirely unnecessary. The hobgoblin irregulars outnumbered the enemy rearguard 3-1, and that was the kind of odds hobgoblins liked. The thought of easy prey drew them like moths to a flame. Every one of them wanted a piece, so they raced forward in a ferocious mob. On the other side of the camp, the air was shaken by a big boom. Imp had countered the enemy mage's blast by throwing a ball of force of his own, using the mage staff he'd claimed before. The two magic blasts had collided and nullified each other, allowing the spearmen to continue marching forward. Meanwhile, 3 of Imp's apprentices slung flaming mana crystals at Warwick's men. The fiery projectiles sizzled as they rose up into the air and then descended. Unfortunately, it seemed Warwick had brought a second combat mage, because a wave of twisting air shot up from the bandits' flank and knocked the fireballs aside. That didn't deter Imp's assistants from throwing another volley of them, though. Soon, magecraft was flying back and forth with abandon, although very little of it hit anything. Both sides prioritized defense and became stuck in a magical deadlock. As Black Nail charged them, the rearguard quickly noticed the line of screaming hobgoblins charging out of the forest. Several flinched and yelled out in shock, but they didn't run. Instead, they closed ranks and prepared to meet his charge. It didn't help them much. Black Nail had gulped down a vial of elixir and its power flowed through him as he ran. As Black Nail lunged forward, he released a wave of gut-twisting fear that washed over the bandits and weakened their resolve. One of them stumbled as dread wormed its way into his mind, and Black Nail cut him down with a lightning-fast flick of his blade. Then, before the other nearby bandits could recover, Black Nail unleashed a flurry of slashes that cut deep into flesh and forced them back. That was when the swarm of hobgoblins hit. Smelling blood, they slammed into the humans and began tearing them apart with little regard for their own safety. There were agonized screams as the crude assortment of weapons sent blood gushing from gaping wounds. As his minions vented their fury, Black Nail stepped through the carnage and focused on what was happening up ahead. There was a plan. He had to focus on it. Having cut a path through the rearguard, he needed to keep his eye on his true prey, Warwick. Ahead of him, the blasts of energy thrown by the mages died out as the two sides finally met, but then one final burning projectile shot up from Warwick's troops. It was a whistling purple fireball, and after rising straight up into the air, it exploded into a large bright star shape. The bang from explosion stung Black Nail's ears, but the spell didn't do any real damage to anything. Unfortunately, it didn't have to. Black Nail suspected he knew the spell's purpose. It was a signal that could be seen for miles. Now that both sides were locked in combat, Warwick had summoned reinforcements. His patrol would see the sign and return immediately. Even the other enemy division might see it and come to investigate. That wasn't good, but it didn't change Black Nail's options. He had to win this fight as soon as possible. As the armies clashed, Warwick roared and ordered his men forward into the wedge of hobgoblin spears. The first row of humans was brought down by the sharp points of hobgoblin spears, but then the second row bullied their way past. Many of those humans screamed and fell as spears pierced them, but then the third row of bandits attacked, and the two sides became locked in a tight brutal melee. At first, neither side gave ground, however the weight of the stronger humans began to push the hobgoblins back. That was when Warwick himself joined the fight. The big man with the wolf helmet pushed past his troops and pulled a huge long sword off his back. With all the spear tips already pushed aside or stuck in other people, there was nothing to stop him from driving his blade into the closest hobgoblin. That hobgoblin died instantly, skewered like a cooked meat on a stick, and then Warwick was hacking and slashing his way forward. Hobgoblins began falling left and right as the wolf's blade tore into them, and the entire formation of spearmen began to tremble and fall apart. Sensing weakness, the human bandits pushed forward to seize the advantage. Thankfully, Black Nail had his own allies. Warwick's advance had not gone unnoticed by Illisti. Unafraid, the Vampire Lord led his men straight toward the thickest fighting. In several places, he simply grabbed hobgoblins that were in his way and tossed them aside. Without slowing, Illisti drew his own longsword and slashed at Warwick, who was pushed back by the blow. The two armored figures began fighting. Their blades clanged as they met repeatedly, but neither seemed to have an immediate advantage. As the Vampire's men joined the battle around their master, they stiffened the hobgoblins' resolve, and the Black Mark Force stopped yielding ground and began pushing back. Black Nail growled impatiently as he watched and waited. Thankfully, it was at that moment that his minions finally got into place. Several of Imp's assistants reached his side and began pulling out red mana crystals. Behind them, the last of the rearguard was swarmed over by hobgoblins and died messily. Keep your shots low. Hit their backs. If you go over their heads, I'll kick your brains out, Black Nail told the mages as they worked. They quickly nodded or blurted out quick affirmations, and a moment later, they were ready to strike. Slings were out and loaded with their ammunition. Black Nail smiled viciously and gladly gave the order. Fire. The hobgoblins obeyed, and as the mana crystals began to burn, they were launched at the back of Warwick's troops. Preoccupied by his sword fight with Illisti, the wolf wasn't aware of the strike until the fireballs hit the back rank of his troops and exploded. Without warning, men were torn apart by vicious explosions, and then a wave of fire washed over them. The flames singed and blackened flesh as they tried to consume everything in their way. Over a dozen of Warwick's men died instantly, more were wounded, and the remainder were stunned by the unexpected explosions at their backs. Many of them were preoccupied fighting hobgoblins and couldn't even turn to see what was happening. They just knew it was bad, and most likely very bad. Black Nail laughed like a madman as he took the sight. Boom. Roasting humans was always fun, especially when they served the wolf. With the rearguard defeated, the hobgoblin irregulars had formed up behind him. So, with a wave of his hand, Black Nail ordered them forward and signaled for his mages to cover their advance with another barrage. As the hobgoblins surged toward the fight, 3 fireballs flew over them toward Warwick's troops. However, only one of the fireballs hit. Forewarned, one of Warwick's mages had gotten himself into position to defend against the attack. A transparent shield of shimmering blue appeared and blocked 2 of the fireballs. However, the one remaining fireball blasted several enemies off their feet and set them aflame. They screamed as they rolled across the ground. With him at their lead, Black Nail's troops yelled bloodthirsty war cries as they charged toward the enemy's exposed rear. However, since they were in the way, the hobgoblin mages couldn't launch any more fireballs. The enemy mage was quick to take advantage of this. He lowered his shield and began throwing force blasts at the charging hobgoblins. There was a loud crunch as a blast slammed into a hobgoblin to Black Nail's left and threw him backwards. However, the irregulars were spread out. The mage kept firing, but all the magical attacks either took out a single target or missed completely. They couldn't stop the mob, but just in case, Black Nail kept his head low. There was no point in making himself a target. As Black Nail raced toward the enemy, Warwick changed his strategy. Black Nail was too close to the press of bodies to see clearly, but there was a sudden surge of activity around the wolf. There was a muffled boom and all the spears near him were knocked aside. At the same time, All the combatants swayed slightly as if surprised or hit by a strong gust of wind. Whatever he'd done, Warwick even somehow managed to push Illisti and his men back a few steps. This gave the wolf a quick reprieve, and he didn't waste it. He began falling back and organizing a retreat. Black Nail could hear him yell out orders, and his men leapt to obey without question. However, Black Nail was forced to turn away and focus on things closer to hand. He was almost upon the enemy, so he drew his sword and threw himself at the closest bandit. The back rank of the enemy had had more than enough time to turn around and face the attack from Black Nail's irregulars, but they were still shocked and unorganized after being blasted by magical fire. As Black Nail's irregulars closed in, he ran down the bandits' line. Hacking and slashing, he ruthlessly attacked every bandit in his way as he worked toward his true goal, Warwick. The bandit lord was making his way toward the back of the formation. The hobgoblin irregulars slammed into the enemy. They were outnumbered, but they had momentum and all they had to do was hold the enemy in place. Illisti and the spear hops had recovered and were pressing the attack from the other side. With Warwick gone, they were slaughtering the human bandits. That was when Warwick suddenly reappeared. He burst out of the back of the enemy formation and began cutting down hobgoblin irregulars, opening a path for his forces to retreat through. Immediately, Black Nail shifted course. He backed away from a stumbling bandit he'd been about to cut down and began moving to intercept the wolf. A blonde human in leather armor with an axe tried to block him, but Black Nail ducked under his swing and sliced his leg open. Blood sprayed from the wound and the man fell screaming, but Black Nail ignored him and moved on. Cutting down one more bandit and shoving another man aside, Black Nail approached Warwick. The wolf had just finished killing a hobgoblin and was focusing on trying to get his men moving. His formerly gleaming armor was splattered by blood and his long fur cloak was torn, but he didn't look injured. Instead, he dominated the space around himself, like a giant. Even through his fury, Black Nail felt momentarily impressed by the sight of the tall man as his gaze swept his way. Warwick's silver helm bore the visage of a snarling wolf. This is unreal. Where are you critters coming from? Warwick asked as he raised his longsword. This doesn't make any sense. Stifling his doubts, Black Nail readied himself and rushed in. At the same time, Warwick swung his weapon around and took a casual slash at him. Black Nail saw the blow coming. As it whipped toward his face, the hobgoblin chieftain readied himself for a fierce fight. He gripped his own blade tightly and let out a deep breath. Deadly calm, but with fire burning in his guts, Black Nail faced Cedar's killer head-on. Will of Iron 13. Warwick's sword cut through the air as it zoomed toward Black Nail's face. However, the hobgoblin was ready. He ducked under the attack and stepped forward. Behind his wolf helmet, a brief frown appeared on Warwick's face as Black Nail then stabbed upward at the man's unarmored armpit. To ward off the blow, Warwick was forced to take a step back and swing his weapon around into a guard position. Black Nail didn't stay still either. That would be stupid against such a powerful opponent. Still moving, he circled around to find a new opening in the man's stance. There's definitely something different about you, Warwick remarked as the battle raged on around him. Over his leather, the wolf was wearing a chainmail shirt with steel pauldrons and bracers on his arms. He towered over Black Nail by over a foot, if you didn't include the hobgoblin's horns, and he must have weighed over twice as much. Black Nail didn't care about that, though. He'd hunted big game before, and this was his greatest enemy. His only real rival and the killer of his master. He had to die. Hissing with barely contained fury, Black Nail burned elixir and feinted left. When Warwick moved to counter the feint, Black Nail quickly turned and slashed right instead with unnatural speed. His blade nicked Warwick's arm and drew blood, although it was but a tiny wound. As Warwick raised his guard again, a look of dawning comprehension appeared on his face. Oh, I understand now, Warwick laughed confidently. You're him, the Black Nail. I didn't recognize you. All you greenskin savages look the same, and there are suddenly a lot you around. All you pink idiots die the same, Black Nail hissed back as he looked for another opening. Time was on his side now. His reinforcements were a lot closer than Warwick's. Warwick just smiled. Oh, I don't think that's true at all. I've seen my fair share of both humanity and death. Still, I must say, you've managed to surprise me quite badly here, with this ambush of yours. Mahedium warned me about you, but I didn't suspect anything like this. You've raised an army from nowhere. If anything, you're even more dangerous than the mage warned. This has become quite the mess. You were a fool to let me lure you here. Underestimating me will be your last mistake, Black Nail replied in a tone that seethed with anger. Your first was daring to take my master from me. I will bleed you for that. Now who is being overconfident? Warwick countered. He didn't seem impressed by Black Nail's bluster. I don't have time to chat though. I admit you've placed me in a bit of an unexpected bind, so let me show you how I pushed back your big friend back there. You should be proud. Very few people have ever managed to make me fight seriously. Harad never did. Black Nail opened his mouth to shout back, but then something odd caught his eye. Warwick's blade had grown hazy. It was almost like smoke was rising from it, creating ripples in the air. Before Black Nail could figure out what he was seeing, Warwick took a step back and slashed. His blade cut empty air, but something shot out from the sword. The blur zoomed straight for Black Nail's head, but he dodged to the side and it flew past him to collide with a hobgoblin that had been running over to join the fight. There was a spray of blood as the invisible force cut into the hobgoblin's chest, and he dropped lifeless to the ground. Black Nail grimaced and turned to focus on Warwick's weapon. Was that a magic sword? Black Nail hated magic. It was never fair. Was Warwick a mage? No, you couldn't be both a mage and vessel, unless everyone had been lying to him. The man must be using the sword to channel his vessel powers somehow. Before Black Nail could give his situation any more thought, Warwick attacked again. He slashed the air and then charged forward with startling speed. Black Nail was forced to jump aside to dodge the magic slash and then hastily try to block Warwick's actual sword. He barely managed it, but he was knocked off balance by the bigger man's strength and stumbled. Bloody magic! As Warwick twisted around to strike at him again, Black Nail decided to even the score. Burning the elixir in his blood, he reached within himself and pushed a wave of mind-smothering fear at Warwick. He growled and bared his teeth as he unleashed the magic. Halfway through the swing Warwick was aiming to decapitate Black Nail with, the power hit him. The wolf flinched in surprise and stumbled, but quickly recovered. Black Nail had time to get his own balance back, but not enough to strike at Warwick in return. He'd been hoping for more, but Warwick was obviously resistant to magic. Most vessels and mages were. What was that? Warwick grumbled as he eyed Black Nail warily and readjusted his stance. The wolf didn't wait for an answer, though. Instead, he immediately attacked again. Without bothering to use his magic, he unleashed a flurry of slashes at Black Nail. Even with his guard up, the hobgoblin was hard-pressed to stop the attacks. The crash of metal on metal rang out as their blades met. Warwick was fast and powerful. His attacks also had weight, and he was armored. Almost every advantage was his. Black Nail jumped back away from a cut aimed at his face, and Warwick didn't follow. Instead, the man slashed the air again, and a blade of air flew past Black Nail. Glancing over his shoulder, Black Nail saw two more his minions fall as the slash tore into them. They'd been about to join in the fight. Not that they would have been much help. This confrontation wasn't going the way Black Nail had thought it would. In his head, he'd pictured himself picking off a wounded Warwick or getting a surprise attack and that would quickly end the fight. At the very least, he'd thought he'd have help. Unfortunately, his minions were useless, and Il City was stuck on the other side of the battle. Still, there had to be a way for him to win. He wasn't going to let Cedar's killer get away. Not when he was right there in front of him and in as weak a position as Black Nail could hope to arrange. Snarling, Black Nail lunged forward and cut at Warwick's side, but the man blocked the attack and replied with one of his own. His blade swung around and nicked Black Nail's arm. The hobgoblin winced. The wound stung, but it wasn't serious. Black Nail couldn't afford any distractions, though. As Warwick took a step back, Black Nail was forced to follow him. Warwick was able to attack from a distance and Black Nail wasn't. With Warwick holding his ground, there was a clear avenue for his troops to move through, and more of them were retreating from the battle. Black Nail couldn't stop them, and his irregulars had become useless. There were too few of them left to block Warwick's retreat. With no other ideas, Black Nail fought an aggressive defense. He kept within striking distance of Warwick but focused more on dodging and blocking rather than trying to cut his enemy down. He was simply buying time now, in the hopes that something would shift the advantage back his way. Off to the right, two hobgoblins managed to take down a bandit, but then two more bandits surged forward and scattered them. As Black Nail dodged a slash aimed at his shoulder, the flow of the battle around him began to change. Most of Warwick's troops had escaped the encirclement now. Only the line of troops holding back Illisti and the hobgoblin spearmen were left, and they were retreating in a slow but orderly fashion. Soon, Warwick and his men would be completely out of the trap. Black Nail hissed as he stepped forward and hacked at Warwick, but the man easily blocked the blow and then pushed. The force of the shove almost knocked Black Nail over, and he was forced to stumble backwards. "Watch out, boss," a voice suddenly yelled. Black Nail glanced over his shoulder to see one of Imp's assistants. He was holding a red mana crystal, which he immediately ignited and threw at Warwick. Instantly, Black Nail jumped out of the way of the burning projectile. Warwick didn't stay still either. However, instead of dodging, he raised a gauntlet hand. As Black Nail watched, a rippling burst of force shot out his palm and hit the crystal, carrying it right back to the hobgoblin who had thrown it. The hobgoblin mage's eyes went wide in shock. He barely had time flinch in surprise before the mix of force and fire hit him in the chest, pushing him backwards, and then it exploded. The air shook from the boom and pieces of earth flew in every direction. Black Nail winced as he saw that there was only a smoking crater where the hobgoblin mage had been standing a second ago. "Ouch. I'm growing impatient. It's time to finish this," Warwick announced as he swung his blade at Black Nail again. As Black Nail dodged the wind blade that sliced past him, he couldn't help but notice that all his nearby minions had suddenly found other places to be. None of them were coming to help him. Instead, they'd found less deadly bandits to attack or had just run away. Stupid minions. This was what he'd created them for. They were being incredibly ungrateful. When this was over, they were all going to get the worst punishments imaginable. Warwick didn't give Black Nail any more time to think. Illisti would soon arrive with his troops, so the wolf went all out. Shoulder first, he swung his sword back and charged straight at his opponent. Black Nail tried to sidestep and take a slice at Warwick's head, but the man didn't dodge. Instead, he just brought his shoulder up and ducked his head down, so it was protected by his pauldron. Screeching, Black Nail's blade scraped against the metal armor without penetrating, and then Warwick smashed into him. They were too close for Warwick to use his sword, but the force of the charge was dangerous enough. Warwick's shoulder hit Black Nail's chest, blasting the air out of his lungs and throwing him up into the air. The hobgoblin's ribs warped and squeezed his organs for a second as the physical force of the blow passed through him. Instantly, pain seared throughout his body and his head whipped back, cracking his neck and making his vision go white for a second. Unprompted and without thought, elixir suddenly flowed through Black Nail's veins. Its power burned through him, and a few pumps of his heart later, he gasped and was pulled back to consciousness. He wasn't going to lose. The need for vengeance still roared within Black Nail, and he fought to reorient himself. However, that was when Warwick struck again. Black Nail was still stumbling backwards. All Warwick had to do was swing his sword. Black Nail saw it coming, but he was too weak to react properly. The hobgoblin could only blink as the blade came around in an arc and smashed into his ribs. Cutting through his leather vest, the sharp metal implement cracked bone and tore into flesh as Black Nail was sent flying sideways. He hit the ground hard, and his limp body rolled across the grass, leaving a trail of blood. Pain blazed throughout Black Nail as his rolling body came to stop. In its wake it left desolation and weakness. He felt cold and his vision had gone blurry. He was laying on his side, and he knew he couldn't stay there, no matter how much he hurt. Grimacing and marshalling his strength, he tried to move, but he couldn't manage anything more than a feeble twitch of an arm. Despair blossomed throughout Black Nail as he realized that he'd lost. He was already dying. No, this couldn't be the end. Dimly, red-hot hate flared up and attempted to push away the smothering darkness of despair and the death that was pressing down on Black Nail's spirit, but it was pointless fight. Movement caught Black Nail's gaze, and he noticed Warwick calmly walking his way. The man stopped a few feet away and looked down at Black Nail. There was an inscrutable frown on his face. So, there's still some life in you. Impressive. It's almost a shame I have to snuff it out, Warwick remarked. You're the only real opponent I've had since I started this business. In a way, dealing with you was practically fun, but this is the last time you'll surprise me. You're far too unpredictable to let live. I still can't wrap my head around how you built an army of hobgoblins, and they'll be as dangerous as demons even without you around to lead them. All Black Nail could manage in reply was a hate-filled gurgle. It burst out of his throat along with more than a few drops of blood. Stupid human. Warwick laughed and raised his weapon. As the man slashed the air, something hit Black Nail's chest. He spasmed as more pain ripped through him. Under this new assault, his body gave out. His vision blacked out and his muscles went limp. Consciousness began to fade. Everything was dim and cold. Black Nail couldn't quite remember where he was or why he hurt so much. Screams of pain and the ring of metal hitting metal echoed over him. Was he in a battle? Everything was going black, even the light of his own thoughts. Suddenly, someone poked Black Nail's shoulder, and his eyes flickered open. His vision was blurry, but he saw two figures leaning over him. Do you think he's dead? One hobgoblin asked the other. Dunno, do you think anyone would care if I took his pants? His companion replied. Black Nail groaned. He was slightly more conscious now. He still couldn't talk but he could glare at them. Bloody minions. So useless. Why couldn't any of them have taken some initiative and become healers? Really good ones. This was all their fault, somehow. Without warning, Black Nail's vision dimmed again and he lost his grip on consciousness. When it returned, he wasn't sure how long had passed, but there were several new people around. One of them had red hair. Oh, no. It was Kita. She wasn't even going to let him die in peace. So annoying. He should be dead already. There are 2 holes in his chest, someone who sounded familiar observed. You need to fight, Black Nail. Don't let death claim you. We're here. We'll get you wrapped up. Fight, Kita shouted in his ear. The redhead sounded quite distraught. Black Nail was glad he wasn't the only one in pain. She was also quite afraid, Black Nail could sense it. In fact, he could sense a lot of fear from countless people. Their thoughts swirled around him, like sparks from a bonfire up into the night sky. Fight what? Wolfie gone, Black Nail wondered aloud. His voice was little more than a quiet rasp. Warwick had gotten away. He'd walked right out of the trap Black Nail had spent so much time building. What was the point in struggling more? Much to Black Nail's frustration, Kita instantly began yelling again. Fight to live. Fight to protect what you've built. Cedar would be so proud if he could see you now. Don't let it all go to waste. We need you. Of course, they needed him. He was the leader. They couldn't do anything without him, the idiots. Kita wouldn't last a day. Black Nail sighed mentally. He wasn't dead yet, despite the wreckage of his body, and that meant his spirit could still fight for life. But did he have the will to fight? What price was he willing to pay? There would be so much pain. Was killing Warwick really all that mattered? An image of Iron Break as seen from the hill overlooking it flashed before Black Nail's eyes. He'd built that. It had been all him. If he died now it would probably fall apart as the hobgoblins turned on each other. Then what would happen to all his poor human minions? Cedar had wanted him to look after them. The old scout had always talked about his love for the North. Really, this wasn't about Black Nail at all. Was that possible? What a weird way to think. Black Nail took a deep breath. It hurt, but the pain cleared his mind. He was dying. He had to do something about that. His body was spent, so he needed a new source of power, and he had an idea. Black Nail burned elixir and felt the burning power flow through him. Then, reaching out with his magic, Black Nail grabbed at the mines he felt all around him. He'd done this once before. Half dead, he remembered how. Cold power flushed throughout Black Nail as he tasted the fear and terror of hundreds. It raged within him as it mingled with the usual fire of his elixir. He was forced to take another aching breath. It burned like he was trying to hold ice with his brain, but he didn't let go. This was magic. If anything could heal him, this could. Focusing, Black Nail sent the power flowing out into his body. A storm of potential. Almost immediately, Black Kale felt his body grow stronger, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. So, the hobgoblin pulled in more power. He ripped at all the minds around him and dragged at their light, sucking in all their terror and hate. It was too much for his body and began to slip away, so Black Nail began forcing the power into one spot and compressing it. That worked. Power poured into Black Nail and raged throughout his body. As the maelstrom whirled and raged, his body expanded in response. Flesh healed, and bone reknit. There were several gasps of shock from the onlookers, but then Gob spoke up from somewhere nearby. We have to move him. No one must see him while he is weak. I do not trust the Vimper or many of the hobs. I'll watch over him myself, and we can trust Hera, Kida quickly responded. That was all Black Nail heard. Without warning, his spirit suddenly gave out and he was consumed by darkness again.